Chapter 916 of the Four Restriction Men. AI, Yao had to get rid of one first. Otherwise, he would have to spend a lot of effort if he was surrounded. He raised the oar and pounced forward, smashing it down from the top. Boom! The Restriction Man actually blocked the attack. AI Yao changed his moves very quickly. This was something he learned from Lei Xingfeng. He took another step forward and flipped the oar, smashing it up from the bottom. The strike landed on the Restriction humanoid's chin, instantly knocking over the 100-meter-tall Restriction humanoid. Mo Yao held the oar with both hands and forcefully stabbed down. With a loud explosion, the Restriction Man was pierced by the tip of the oar. His huge body couldn't withstand it anymore and exploded. In an instant, his huge body disappeared. Lei Xingfeng's eyes widened in shock. These moves were as fast as lightning, killing the Restriction Man in 2 to 3 seconds. Different from his previous clumsiness, this rapid killing made him look at him in a new light. In the end, Lei Xingfeng's attention was diverted. Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but laugh in the following battle. AI Yao was still as clumsy as before. Other than smashing, the huge or only used these two moves. Occasionally, he would change his moves, but they were still as clumsy as before. It was completely different from the previous battle. Lei Xingfeng suddenly realized that he had used this move on AI Yao before. The three Restriction Men surrounded AI Yao and also clumsily punched and kicked. However, AI Yao, with a sixth ring true body, and basically ignored the punches and kicks that landed on his body. This was the benefit of being strong. Lei Xingfeng shook his head. This was also because AI Yao relied on his sixth ring true body's defense to ignore the opponent's attacks. If it was Lei Xingfeng, the opponent wouldn't even be able to touch him. Lei Xingfeng once again focused his attention on the restrictions. He already had some insights and saw some changes in the restrictions. He also comprehended some of the mysteries of the restrictions. This made him very excited. As he observed, Lei Xingfeng's Lei Yin also created some restrictions. These restrictions were created based on Lei Xingfeng's comprehension. When Lei Xingfeng discovered the initial formation of these restrictions, he was very happy. This made him understand a principle. As long as he saw restrictions and understood them before, Lei Yin would be able to create similar restrictions with a strong personal touch. The newly formed restrictions in Lei Yin's body were only the beginning. In order to grow, Lei Xingfeng needed to understand more about the restrictions in front of him. There were many restrictions here that Lei Xingfeng didn't understand. As long as the restrictions were still operating, Lei Xingfeng would be able to discover many things. Therefore, he didn't want AI Yao to stop fighting. As for AI Yao's request for him to join in, he turned a deaf ear. He just smiled and looked back and forth. AI Yao was really angry. He shouted, "Little guy, help!" Lei Xingfeng ignored him and said, "Senior, you should be able to handle it. Do you still need my help? You don't have the demeanor of an expert." AI Yao was so angry that he almost vomited blood. This little guy's words were full of sarcasm. He said, "Hurry up and help. Just keep two of them busy." Lei Xingfeng wanted to see the changes in the restrictions. How could he help him quickly destroy the restrictions? He smiled and said, "You're a sixth ring true body expert. Do you still need the help of a little guy like me? Hee, I won't interfere. Let's watch Senior fight." AI Yao originally had the upper hand. However, when he was talking to Lei Xingfeng, he was suppressed by the three restrictions. He was so angry that he waved his weapon and forced the three restrictions back. Xi and Feng found it funny. This fellow's fighting style was too stupid. If he had only focused on one and ignored the others, he would have already killed that one. But he actually focused on the three of them, giving them a chance to catch their breaths. Equal treatment gave the restriction people a chance. Although they couldn't defeat Moya, this fellow was really strong. However, they were able to successfully stall him. The restriction people weren't living beings. They didn't fear death at all. They relied on the power provided by the restriction to fight. It could be considered a stalemate. AI Yao was soon under pressure. He was irritated to the extreme. He was constantly attacked by the opponents. Although they couldn't hurt him, Lei Xingfeng was beside him. This made him lose face. Lei Xingfeng ignored AI Yao and continued to focus on the restrictions. After a short moment, Moa Demon finally reacted. She madly smashed at one of the restriction people, completely ignoring the attacks of the other two restriction people. After continuously attacking, that restriction person could not hold on at all and was shattered by Moa Demon. He turned around and attacked another restriction. Once AI Yao understood the rhythm of the battle, he immediately gained the upper hand. In just a short while, the three restrictions were destroyed. AI Yao said angrily, "Little guy, without you, I can still kill them." Lei Xingfeng looked back at him and smiled. "It's not over yet." Then, two more restrictions walked out of the formation. According to Lei Xingfeng's understanding, they were hollow true bodies. They were very similar to cultivators' true bodies. The only difference was that they didn't have a main body and seals. The two new restrictions were stronger. They were equivalent to two cultivators with 4 true ring bodies. Of course, they were still a bit weak compared to true 4-ring cultivators. But the two of them had 4 true ring bodies. AI Yao grumbled bitterly. Although he was strong, the constant battle had exhausted his energy. This made him feel like he had suffered a great loss. AI Yao shouted, "Little guy, each of us can deal with one." Lei Xingfeng grinned. He wasn't that stupid. The most interesting thing was that the two restrictions that came out of the formation directly pounced on AI Yao. They didn't even look at Lei Xingfeng. Clang, 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 clang. Once again, AI Yao clashed with the two restriction masters. Lei Xingfeng continued to observe the formation. The more he watched, the happier he became. The longer the formation operated, the more changes he saw. Lei Yin's restrictions grew faster. AI Yao couldn't say anything. She could only stare at one of them and hope that she could defeat them quickly. However, the defense of these two restricted men had obviously increased by a lot. Perhaps their attacks weren't as strong, but their ability to take hits was rather strong. Furthermore, the two of them worked together and attacked one another. AI Yao didn't have Xian Feng's ever-changing attacks and was being tossed around. Lei Xingfeng and Lei Yin's restrictions had already formed. Large amounts of materials and energy were quickly being consumed. This was equivalent to cultivating. However, cultivating restrictions wasn't something Lei Yin needed. AI Yao finally found an opportunity and used all his strength to defeat one of the restrictions. The remaining restriction was quickly defeated by AI Yao because he didn't have any companions to help him. The continuous battle caused AI Yao to expend a large amount of energy. This fellow was extremely pained. Before AI Yao could speak, Lei Xingfeng said indifferently, "There's one more." As expected, the restriction quickly activated and another restriction man walked out. This restriction man's aura was even stronger than Xian Feng's. He spoke, "Good fellow, the strength of a 5th-ring soul master." AI Yao's expression became serious. He wasn't worried about the battle just now. He knew that he would definitely win. However, if he wasn't careful, he would injure himself. This made him even more irritated. One had to know that even if AI Yao had 6 rings, it would still take a lot of effort to break through the opponent's defense. It wasn't an easy task, especially when the opponent wasn't human. He didn't fear and didn't know danger. Unknowingly, his strength would increase by a level. Most importantly, a 5-ring strength could already shake AI Yao's true body. AI Yao glared at Lei Xingfeng and shouted, "Little fellow, when you're in danger, I won't help you." Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but laugh. He said, "Senior, don't be like this. Haha, you're so strong. It's not right for you to need my help." Ha! AI Yao and his opponent were fighting chaotically. They didn't have time to talk. This restriction was a bit different. His attack power was quite good. Although it couldn't threaten AI Yao's attacks wouldn't be able to kill him instantly. Thus, the two of them fought. Rumbling sounds rang out. Smoke and dust billowed. Both of them had extraordinary strength. Their fight was different from before. It was much more intense. The entire formation started to spin faster. Xian Feng really wanted to walk in, but he knew that if he did, he would end up the same as Moa Yao, being attacked by a large group of people from the restriction. As Moa Demon fought, she suddenly put away her weapon and let out a strange cry. She began to clash head-on with her opponent. Fist against fist, foot against foot, she fought head-on. Every punch was heavier than the last. Every kick was fiercer than the last, causing the Restriction Man to continuously retreat. AI Yao's forceful attacks forced the Restriction Man to retreat towards Xian Foam. When Lei Xingfeng turned his attention away from the restriction, he discovered that the restriction person was less than 100 meters away from him. In an instant, Lei Xingfeng understood AI Yao's intention. He was trying to draw trouble to him. Lei Xingfeng sneered. He immediately retreated to the side. He wasn't stupid enough to get involved. AI Yao attacked even harder, trying to make the restriction person notice Lei Xingfeng. However, he didn't know that even if Lei Xingfeng attacked the restriction person would only attack AI Yao. This was because AI Yao was the one who touched the restriction formation and not Lei Xingfeng. The restriction person suddenly retreated. AI Yao chased closely. Lei Xingfeng suddenly understood. He said, "Interesting." AI Yao said, "What do you mean? Kid, what do you mean?" Lei Xingfeng chuckled and said, "Nothing, nothing. Continue." AI Yao threw a few more punches, causing the restriction person to sway. He knew that if he put in a little more effort, he might be able to defeat his opponent. Therefore, his attacks became more rapid. He used more strength. The energy consumption was almost breaking his heart. It was too much. The restriction person had already retreated to the edge of the restriction formation. After receiving a punch from AI Yao, his entire body trembled violently. He then stepped back into the restriction formation. In an instant, the entire restriction formation started to operate rapidly. A large amount of energy poured into the restriction person's body. AI Yao looked at the restriction person, who was still intact, and wanted to cry. Chapter 9:17. It was as if everything had been refreshed. The attack, just now, the true body that almost collapsed, had completely recovered. It was as if it had been reborn. AI Yao was dumbfounded. Could he still fight? He didn't want to fight, but the restriction person didn't care. AI Yao shouted, "Damn it, I'm not playing anymore." He quickly retreated and ran into the distance. The restriction person chased after him. Lei Xingfeng didn't move. He continued to watch the restriction change. AI Yao looked around and found that there was no way to go. He was teleported here, so there was no way to leave. If he wanted to leave, he had to go through the restriction formation that he had just provoked. There was no other way. He had to kill this restriction person. The two of them started fighting again. In any case, AI Yao definitely wouldn't let this restriction person get close to the restriction formation again. This thing could rely on the restriction formation to replenish its energy. Moreover, any damage could be refreshed. Who could endure this? However, AI Yao also noticed his opponent's weakness. That was, the restriction person's strength would decrease if he stayed away from the restriction formation. Hence, he blocked the restriction person's path and attacked crazily again. After a while, the restriction man wasn't a true five-ring master, so he gradually weakened. He kept retreating under Moa Demon's continuous attacks. Just as Moa Demon was about to attack with all her strength, the restriction man did something that Moa Demon didn't expect. He actually turned around and ran. AI Yao was stunned. Before he could react, the restriction person was already running towards the restriction formation. AI Yao hurriedly chased after him while shouting, "Little guy, stop him! Stop him!" Lei Xingfeng didn't care about AI Yao at all. Instead, he moved aside and raised his hand. "This is between you two. Don't drag me in." AI Yao was furious. Once this half-dead restriction person returned to the restriction formation, he would immediately become a new body. When he came out, he would have to fight again. This was definitely going to make him collapse. With the restriction array's guidance, Ma Yao was actually unable to catch up to the restriction master. As for Lei Xingfeng, he didn't even try to stop him. He could only watch as the restriction master, who was on the verge of collapsing, entered the array once more and ran out as if he had been reborn. This made him want to die. Lei Xingfeng continued to observe the restriction array. Gradually, he understood the first half of the restriction. However, the second half was a little blurry. He needed to make some conjectures. If the restriction was still operating, Lei Xingfeng was confident that he could deduce what kind of restriction it was. As long as Moa Yao was still fighting, he would be able to obtain a large amount of useful information about the restriction. Fight, fight, fight for a bit more time. That way, I'll have a chance to figure out this formation. Hee, continue to fight. Fight with all your strength. It's fine as long as you don't kill him. Lei Xingfeng muttered to himself, but his eyes were fixed on the restriction array. Under the various changes, he was trying to figure out the mysteries of the restriction array. The difficult problem was solved bit by bit. This made Lei Xingfeng very excited. This sense of accomplishment made him even more excited than advancing. As his understanding deepened, Lei Yin's restriction array was also changing. It was constantly growing and gradually taking shape. Lei Xingfeng had to completely understand the principle of the restriction array's operation before Lei Yin's restriction array took shape. That way, even if he missed some parts, it didn't matter. The restriction array's growth would automatically fill in the gaps. The key was that the framework and foundation couldn't be wrong. Ma Yao was about to go crazy. This was because he couldn't instantly kill the restriction master. One person couldn't stop him from going back to respawn. Even if he was stronger than the restriction master, he couldn't kill his opponent. If this continued, he wouldn't be able to endure it. He was consuming too much energy. At the beginning of the battle, his energy consumption could be described as a small stream. However, when he fought with this perverted restriction master, his energy consumption would be like a surging river. Ma Yao had a clear understanding. If Lei Xingfeng wasn't willing to help, he would lose a lot of energy. He might even be exhausted to death by this restriction master. A high-intensity battle meant a high intensity of energy consumption. This was something that every cultivator knew. Lei Xingfeng hadn't expected that this restriction master would be so difficult to deal with. He still didn't want to help. Firstly, he wanted to observe the restriction. Secondly, he had some misgivings. If he didn't help, the restriction array wouldn't treat him as an enemy. However, once he did, who knew what would happen? If two people like this appeared in the restriction array, Lei Xingfeng would also have a headache. Therefore, he was determined not to help and was determined to watch. This was Lei Xingfeng's current attitude. No matter how much Ma Yao threatened or cursed, Lei Xingfeng remained unmoved. This was a crucial moment. How could Lei Xingfeng care about this fella? At this moment, many details of the array were exposed. Lei Xingfeng had some doubts, but as the restriction revolved, he directly obtained the answer. He was so enraptured that he didn't have the time to care about Ma Yao. Ma Yao felt like he was fighting with Lei Xingfeng. He couldn't kill him, but he couldn't endure it. He could still continue fighting with Lei Xingfeng because he didn't consume much energy. However, fighting with this restriction master was different. As long as this thing fought with him, he would consume a lot of energy. The battle was also very intense. This consumption made him want to cry, but no tears came out. Lei Xingfeng would occasionally look back. It wasn't that he wanted to help, but he wanted to prevent Ma Yao from luring the restriction master to him. If he accidentally encountered the restriction master, he would have to join in even if he didn't want to. Ma Yao tried several times, but Lei Xingfeng was alert enough to avoid him. He was truly at his wit's end. Lei Xingfeng had already walked along the periphery of the restriction 3 times. He had seen all kinds of changes. Some changes had already happened 3 or 4 times. He could predict the next change in the restriction. As for Lei Yin's restriction, it was finally starting to take shape. This made Lei Xingfeng very happy. AI Yao finally grasped an opportunity and hugged the restriction man. Relying on brute force, she flipped him to the ground. Then, she rode on the restriction man's body and swung her huge fists wildly. She had already entered the berserk state. The amount of energy she consumed made her heart ache. After 7 or 8 punches with all his strength, he finally smashed the restriction master apart. This fella sat on the ground, trembling. He was angered by the restriction master and Lei Xingfeng. When the restriction master was smashed apart, Ma Yao glared at Lei Xingfeng with red eyes. He looked like he was going to fight to the death. Lei Xingfeng turned his head and found that Ma Yao had already smashed the restriction master. Ma Yao was also glaring at him, looking like he was going to fight. Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but take 2 steps back. He smiled and said, Congratulations, you finally got rid of him. Hee hee. He laughed dryly. Ma Yao shouted, Kid, is it so hard to get you to help me? Although he was very angry, he knew that Lei Xingfeng was much harder to deal with than the restriction master. He didn't plan to fight with him. He didn't suffer the lesson last time for nothing. Lei Xingfeng giggled and said, Old Magi, don't be angry. Can't you see that I'm busy? Hee hee, and you're 6-ring expert. I can't help you if you want a 4-ring expert like me to help. The restriction master, just now, was at least a 5-ring expert. Ma Yao shouted, 5-ring? You even dare to hit a 6-ring expert. Is a 5-ring expert that scary? Lei Xingfeng was still giggling as he pointed at the restriction formation and said, Sorry, it's not convenient for me to interfere. You still have 2 restriction masters to deal with. AI Yao saw 2 5-ringed restriction enforcers walk out of the formation and couldn't help but cry out, What kind of F** king restriction is this? Little guy, I really have to help this time. Otherwise, we'll be in big trouble. Given how difficult it was to deal with the restriction just now, Moa Yao really wouldn't be able to block 2 5th-ring restriction masters. Even if she could win, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. But here was the problem. This time, there were 2 5th-ring restriction masters. What if there were 4 next time? And then 8? This was going to kill him. Lei Xingfeng estimated that with Magi Yao's strength, he should be able to handle 2 people. Even if he couldn't kill them, he should be able to hold on for a long time. This way, he would have more time to observe. Magi Yao rushed towards Lei Xingfeng. He gritted his teeth and said, Since you don't want to help, I won't let you go. Do you think you can stay out of this? That's impossible. Lei Xingfeng didn't expect Magi Yao to be so desperate. He turned around and ran without hesitation towards the 2 restriction masters. Moby Demon cursed. He was about to go crazy. As expected, Xi and Feng circled around the 2 restriction men and continued running. Before Moby Demon could even get close to the restriction men, the 2 fellows created by the restriction men had already charged at him. Very quickly, they formed a line with Xi and Feng at the front, followed by AI Yao, and behind them were the 2 restriction men. Luckily, there's a lot of space here, so even if the 4 of them were to run, there was still enough space to maneuver. As they ran, Lei Xingfeng said, Hey, old man Magi, if you make me angry, I'll attack you together with the restriction masters. Magi Yao shouted, To think that we know each other. Can't you help me? Little ancestor, you just have to help me stall one of them. Don't run. Lei Xingfeng said, I'd be an idiot if I stopped. He ran even faster. Magi Yao was angry and anxious. He wasn't really afraid of the 2 restriction masters. He just felt that there was no meaning in fighting them like this. There was no benefit in winning, and a stalemate would consume a lot of energy. This was really too much for him. Lei Xingfeng wanted to continue observing the restriction masters, but he was being chased by Magi Yao. He didn't have time to do so, and his heart was itching with hatred. Old man, that's enough. Don't chase anymore. Magi Yao didn't agree. He continued to chase and said, Help me stall one of them, and I won't chase anymore. Lei Xingfeng said, No, that's impossible. It's none of my business. Magi Yao said, Then don't blame me for chasing you. Lei Xingfeng scolded, Are you crazy? Why are you chasing me? Magi Yao said, Humph, if I don't chase you, who will I chase? Stop right there. Lei Xingfeng deliberately slowed down. Seeing that Magi Yao was about to catch up to him, he suddenly turned around. A huge steel rod appeared in Lei Xingfeng's hand. He turned around and swung it, ruthlessly smashing it towards Magi Yao's thigh. Magi Yao didn't expect Lei Xingfeng to attack him. He was caught off guard and was hit in the thigh. Chapter 9:18. This strike caused Moa Yao to stagger a few steps. Lei Xingfeng put away the steel rod and continued to run forward. Moa Yao angrily shouted, You dare to hit me? You dare to hit me? Before he could finish speaking, the restriction person behind him had already caught up and punched him in the back. Lei Xingfeng ran in front and said, Sorry, I just didn't want you to get too close to me. Sorry. With just a few words, he had already run far away. Moa Yao had no choice but to turn around and block. He exchanged a punch with the restriction person. The 2 restriction people immediately surrounded Moa Yao and attacked him crazily. The two restriction people attacked one after the other. Moa Yao could only block and block with all his might. Although he could fight with the two restriction people, he was clearly at a disadvantage and felt a little flustered. However, it was only two restriction people. Moa Yao just needed to adapt a little, and he could still deal with them. However, it would be very difficult to kill them. Unless Lei Xingfeng helped, Moa Yao would really be tortured to death. Who knew how much energy it would take? Lei Xingfeng hid to the side and continued to observe the changes in the restriction. As time passed, many changes were recorded in his mind. He then compared them with the restrictions he had learned before and slowly mastered them. Moa Yao was very clear that he needed Lei Xingfeng's help. Otherwise, he would be in big trouble. He shouted, "Brat, hurry up and help." Lei Xingfeng turned around and looked at him. He sneered and said, "Do you think I will help?" Moa Yao was so angry that he screamed. He wanted to move towards Lei Xingfeng again. The two restriction people were very strong and looked like they would not stop until they were dead. It was very difficult for him to move. He had to endure the restriction people's attacks just to take a step. Lei Xingfeng saw Moa Yao moving towards him. He also moved and maintained a distance so that Moa Yao would not rush in front of him. Once he was entangled with Moa Yao, he would definitely be entangled with the restriction people. If he came into contact with the restriction people, then Lei Xingfeng would be one of the targets in the next round of attacks. He did not want to be entangled with such restriction people. Moa Yao complained incessantly. In this battle, he had been keeping an eye on one of the methods. Once the restriction person could no longer hold on, another restriction person would step forward and tremble. And that restriction person who could no longer hold on would quickly retreat into the restriction and return to normal. When Xian Feng finally understood this restriction, he couldn't help but be shocked by its perverted nature. Yao quickly said, little brat, little ancestor, help me. Since we're both cultivators, please help me out." Lei Xingfeng said, "Help you? How?" AI Yao said, "Help me stall one of them. Let me kill one and then deal with the other one. I am confident." Lei Xingfeng said, "Xing, you probably do not know what restriction this restriction. Once I help you, two more restriction people will immediately appear. Do you think you still have a chance?" Moa Yao was shocked. He said, "What? How is that possible?" Lei Xingfeng said, "How is it not possible? Let me tell you, even if you break these two restrictions, there will not be two restriction people next time, but three." Moa Yao's legs went soft. He shouted, "Ah, is there an end to this?" Xian Feng spoke, "It's not over yet. If you could defeat the three restriction men." Moa Yao shouted, "No wonder there will be four restriction people." Lei Xingfeng clapped and said, "Correct. However, you don't have to worry. For people is the maximum number. Any more, and the restriction won't be able to endure it. Of course, even if you destroy four people, you'll have to start all over again." Moa Yao was scared out of his wits. He was going to torture him to death. He said, You know restrictions? How can I break them?" Lei Xingfeng spread out his hands and said, "You should not have retreated in the first place. If you had kept charging forward, there might have been a glimmer of hope. When you retreated, the entire restriction formation group was your enemy." Moa Yao punched a restriction person and shouted, "Is there no way to break it?" Lei Xingfeng said, "What do you think?" Moa Yao knew that even if he could kill the restriction people, how could he resist such a cycle of enemies? Even if he consumed energy, he would be exhausted to death. This restriction was really abnormal. He shouted, "No, you have to think of a way for me. You can't just watch me suffer." Lei Xingfeng said, "This is not something I can solve." Moa Yao was about to explode. This was a dead end. He shouted, Brother, help me think of a way. As long as you save me this time, I will not forget your kindness." Actually, Lei Xingfeng knew that he had to save Moa Yao because he also had to go through this restriction formation. There was no other way. However, he could not make a move now. He had to wait until he killed two or even four restriction people. He had to enter the formation when the restriction was at its strongest. Only then would he have the confidence to break this formation. Thinking about it, Lei Xingfeng knew that if he did not help Moa Yao, he would not be able to last until the end. He was a sixth ring true body. This restriction probably needed a seventh ring true body. He might be able to easily exhaust the restriction formation's energy, but Moa Yao could not do it now. Lei Xingfeng said, "Really?" Moa Yao did not understand and was confused. He said, "What do you mean, really?" Lei Xingfeng said, "You mean if I save you, what will you do?" Moa Yao said, I will promise you anything." Lei Xingfeng was disgusted. He said, forget it. You're also a pauper. You won't get any benefits. Just wait." Moa Yao was still shouting, I will promise you anything. You're my grandpa, you are." He did not know what he was saying. Lei Xingfeng started to set up the restriction formation. Moa Yao's mind was already in a mess, so he was beaten up. Fortunately, he was much stronger than the restriction people. Even if he was beaten up, he would only use up a little more energy. Lei Xingfeng quickly set up the formation. Moa Yao was dizzy from the beating and shouted, You help me." As he shouted, he looked at Lei Xingfeng. Moa Yao could not see what Lei Xingfeng was busy with and shouted, "Hey, help!" Lei Xingfeng shouted, "Shut up! Wait!" The domineering shout immediately made Moa Yao shut up. He could only resist with all his might. He was originally suppressing 2 restriction people, but now he was resisting 2 restriction people with all his might. His mind was in a mess, and his strength dropped by at least 30%. Lei Xingfeng finished setting up the restriction and shouted, "Retreat to this side. Don't be too fast. Retreat slowly." As he spoke, he walked to the side. Moa Yao heard this and immediately retreated to Lei Xingfeng's position. Lei Xingfeng scolded, "Idiot! That's where I was just now." Moa Yao was scolded until his face and neck turned red. He could only follow Lei Xingfeng's instructions and retreat to where Lei Xingfeng was just now. Lei Xingfeng watched as Moa Yao retreated to the restriction he set up. He shouted, "Focus on one of them and beat him up." Moa Yao stared at the restriction people in front of him and attacked crazily. He completely ignored the person who was chasing after him. In an instant, the surroundings changed drastically. In an instant, there was only one enemy left in front of Moa Yao. The restriction people behind him had actually disappeared without a trace. Then, he heard Lei Xingfeng shout, "There shouldn't be a problem to get rid of one, right?" Moa Yao was instantly overjoyed. He shouted, "There shouldn't be a problem." Even if it took some effort and energy to beat a restriction person, Moa Yao wouldn't have a problem. His strength was indeed much higher than the restriction person. When he went all out, a restriction person wouldn't be able to resist Moa Yao. Especially when he was inside the restriction, he would also disrupt the restriction person's attacks. In just a few breaths' time, Moa Yao successfully shattered the restriction person. At this moment, the surroundings changed again and returned to the previous scene. He saw the remaining restriction people pouncing over. Moa Yao roared and pounced over as well. He was really sullen and ruthless. After a few heavy blows, he had completely shattered the restriction person before he could react. Lei Xingfeng applauded and said, "Not bad, not bad. There are still 3 of them." As expected, just as Lei Xingfeng finished speaking, another 3 restriction people emerged from the restriction array and pounced towards Moa Yao. Moa Yao shouted, "Can you separate them?" He had full confidence in a one-on-one battle. He admitted that he couldn't win against 3. Even if he won, he wouldn't be able to eliminate the 3 restriction people, especially when they returned to the restriction array to recover. It gave him a headache. Lei Xingfeng said, "As long as you don't leave your standing position, I can let you deal with them one by one." Moa Yao was overjoyed. He said, "Brother, thank you." He was really grateful. No matter what, Lei Xingfeng had given him a chance. Even if Lei Xingfeng didn't help him fight. Lei Xingfeng said, "They're coming. You have to withstand the first wave." That meant he had to fight one against 3. This way, he would be able to trap all 3 of them in the restriction array. Moa Yao said, "All right." Even if he had to suffer some losses and get beaten up by the 3, he had to do as Lei Xingfeng said. In the blink of an eye, AI Yao was fighting with the 3 restriction people. When his confidence was restored, his strength had also increased by a large margin. He advanced and retreated with the 3 restriction people, and the battle was in full swing. Lei Xingfeng saw the opportunity and instantly activated the restriction array. Mo Yao suddenly realized that there was only one enemy left in front of him. He instantly laughed and clenched his teeth as he stared at the restriction person and attacked continuously. He directly killed the restriction person. Immediately after, the restriction array suddenly disappeared. The other two restriction people pounced. Mo Yao followed Lei Xingfeng's instructions and stared at one of them. In an instant, the restriction array was activated again. Mo Yao faced another restriction person. After 3 rounds, Mo Yao destroyed 3 restriction people. At this point, Mo Yao completely trusted Lei Xingfeng. He knew that this guy was crazy. He was actually proficient in restriction arrays. Lei Xingfeng said, "All right, there are 4 restriction people. You have to withstand the first wave. Just stare at one person and don't mess around." Lei Xingfeng had already observed that the entire restriction array was operating like crazy. The energy consumption was terrifying. Soon, 4 restriction people appeared and walked out of the array. Chapter 919. AI Yao felt a chill run down his spine. If it wasn't for Exine, he believed that no matter if it was 2 or 3 restriction men, it would be hard for him to deal with them. For restriction men, it was already impossible for him to win. If Exine wasn't here, he might really die here. The 4 restriction users pounced at AI Yao as soon as they came out. The 4 of them quickly approached AI Yao and launched a frenzied attack. In an instant, AI Yao expended a large amount of energy to resist. He did not care about anything else and just focused on attacking the restriction users in front of him. One after another, the restriction men were eliminated. Against a single restriction man, AI Yao was confident that he could defeat them. Even if he had to expend more effort and energy, he still had the ability to do so. With the help of the restriction, the 4 restriction men were quickly eliminated. After the 4 restriction users were eliminated, Lei Xingfeng also stopped the restriction from operating. AI Yao did not care and withdrew his true body. He had eliminated so many restriction users. The amount of energy he had consumed was no longer a matter of heartache. It was enough to make him unconscious. It had consumed at least a third of his energy. If he retained less than half of his original energy crystals, his combat strength would plummet. Lei Xingfeng noticed that AI Yao was sweating all over. It was as if he had just been fished out of water. He smiled and said, "The second wave will come soon. This restriction is an endless cycle. If you don't die, there will be more restriction users coming out, from the lowest to the highest, until the restriction array's energy is exhausted. If you can exhaust the restriction array's energy, you win." AI Yao said, You have a way to break this restriction?" Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "Yes, I should have a way to break this restriction. But why should I break this restriction? There is no benefit." AI Yao sat on the ground and said, "Why are you so annoying?" Lei Xingfeng said, "All right, let's assume. What would you do if you were in my shoes?" AI Yao was speechless. If he was in AI Yao's shoes, he would probably do something even worse. It was already good enough that he did not add insult to injury, let alone help. After a while, AI Yao said, "What would it take for you to help?" Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "The harvest. I will split it 80% and you will split it 20%. AI Yao was confused and said, "What harvest? How is this possible?" Suddenly, he realized that if he didn't agree, not to mention 20% of the income, he might not even be able to keep his life. He hurriedly said, I agree." Lei Xingfeng giggled and said, "All right, since I promised, I'll do it." AI Yao smiled bitterly and said, "Of course, I can still take responsibility for this." At this time, a group of restriction cultivators emerged from the restriction formation. However, their strength was the same as before, and a new round began. AI Yao felt his scalp go numb. He said, "What should we do?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Go and lure them over. Also, leave one restriction master behind and kill the rest. Don't kill the one left behind. The more you kill, the more there will be. It shouldn't be difficult for you to deal with such an opponent." With 2 true ring bodies, even if he just stood there and let him hit him, it wouldn't take much energy. AI Yao said, "Yes, but how long will it take for it to end?" Lei Xingfeng said, "The longer, the better. If I want to break the formation, I need someone to hold me back." AI Yao said, "What if I accidentally destroy him? What then?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Didn't I tell you? The more you fight, the stronger they get. Do you want to deal with the weak restriction cultivators or the strong ones?" AI Yao said, "Of course the weak ones. I'm not stupid." Lei Xingfeng ignored him. Sometimes, he felt that this guy's brain wasn't working well. He thought and said, "Try to drag it out as long as possible. I don't know how long it will take to break the formation." AI Yao said bitterly, "All right, I'll try to drag it out. Right? Activate the restriction formation here. If I can't hold on, I can retreat inside and take care of them one by one." Lei Xingfeng said, "No way. If I'm not here, this restriction can't be activated unless I'm beside it. This restriction is very simple. Because it's simple, it doesn't have any automatic activation function. It was a simple illusion formation, but under X-Phone's control, it could create powerful illusions. Even if it was a restriction created by another restriction, it would still be able to cause people to get lost." AI Yao said, "In other words, if you go break the formation, I won't have any support?" Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "Correct. Actually, you don't have to be nervous at all. Leave a weak restriction cultivator who's as weak as a second ring cultivator and slowly deal with them." AI Yao was already slaughtering the restriction people. The group of restriction people were of no threat to him at all, and he quickly destroyed them. Of course, he left one of them behind and dealt with him very carefully. He was afraid that he would accidentally destroy the restriction people with a single punch. That would be very fun. AI Yao didn't dare to hit the remaining restriction cultivator with his fist. He was afraid that he would destroy the restriction cultivator. Instead, he hugged him and threw him to the ground. Then he watched him crawl. When he crawled halfway, he kicked away the arm that supported his body. Then he watched him lie down again. AI Yao was having fun and kept kicking the restriction cultivators. Lei Xingfeng saw that it was about time and said, "Okay, I'm going to enter the formation." AI Yao was completely relaxed now. As long as he knew how to deal with it, he wouldn't continue to panic. Lei Xingfeng came to the position that he had already scouted and strode into the restriction. AI Yao had been paying attention to Lei Xingfeng. When he saw this guy walk into the restriction formation, he couldn't help but cry out. However, the next scene made his eyeballs almost fly out. This was too exaggerated. The restriction didn't seem to have any reaction at all. What was this? His huge true body walked into restriction. Even though Lei Xingfeng was very familiar with restrictions, he didn't dare to use his true body. At this time, his true body couldn't withstand the impact of the restriction. Countless restriction nodes hit his true body and then quietly passed through it. Lei Xingfeng's true body was like air. The restriction nodes couldn't detect it. Even so, Lei Xingfeng didn't dare to walk towards the dense restriction nodes. He had to find a place where the restriction nodes were sparse. He relied on Little Kong's spatial ability to avoid some restriction nodes. However, if there were too many restriction nodes, he wouldn't be able to deal with them. Therefore, this path was scouted from the beginning. Even if the restrictions were constantly changing, he knew how to move forward. After walking for a long time, Lei Xingfeng was very careful. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to deal with the restriction nodes and trigger the entire restriction formation. The result would be the same as AI Yao, being chased by the restriction cultivator. This place was the restriction hub. Although it wasn't the main restriction hub, it was still an important restriction hub. Once it was destroyed, the entire restriction wouldn't be as flexible. With a punch, he directly opened up a large hole in the ground. This was a barbaric method of destroying by force. He didn't have the heart to carefully crack it. After that punch, Lei Xingfeng quickly moved to the side. Then, he saw the countless restriction nodes gathering together. Lei Xingfeng slowly retreated and continued to look for the second restriction hub. AI Yao kicked the restriction cultivator. As long as he couldn't get up, it would be fine. His attention was always on Lei Xingfeng. When he saw the huge, true body walking freely in the restriction formation, he couldn't help but exclaim in his heart, How could this person walk in the restriction formation like this? This made AI Yao very unconvinced. When he walked into the restriction formation, he didn't even take a few steps before the restriction formation counterattacked. He even provoked the restriction cultivators in an endless cycle. Waves of restriction cultivators fought endlessly. But why was Lei Xingfeng fine? No matter if he understood or didn't understand, Lei Xingfeng could move freely in the restriction formation. This was something he could clearly see. Suddenly, AI Yao understood. If Lei Xingfeng really didn't care about him, he could have just passed through the formation and ignored him. Then he could have escaped. In other words, Lei Xingfeng didn't need to save him. He could have escaped, but he chose to help him. AI Yao's heart was in a daze. This was beyond his expectations. At this moment, the entire ground shook violently. The restriction cultivator who just got up fell down again. This time, it wasn't AI Yao who kicked him. Even AI Yao couldn't stand still. Suddenly, the restriction man violently trembled before exploding. Mo Yao was dumbfounded. I didn't hit him. Why did he self-explode? Didn't this mean that an even more powerful restriction cultivator would come? Just as AI Yao's heart was in a mess, Lei Xingfeng came out of the restriction formation and said, "All right, the restriction formation is broken. Let's leave this place." AI Yao was completely dumbfounded. He said stupidly, just like that, the restriction formation was broken? How could it be so easy? Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but laugh. He said, "Easy? Come and try." AI Yao was speechless. Of course, he knew a little about restrictions. In fact, there were very few people who didn't know anything about restrictions. However, there were even fewer people who were proficient in restrictions. Most cultivators only knew a little about restrictions. They would be dumbfounded if they saw a slightly more profound restriction. Lei Xingfeng said, "Consider yourself lucky. I saw it just now. In order to exhaust the entire restriction formation's energy, it would take at least 10 rounds of restriction cultivators. How many rounds of attacks do you think you can withstand?" 10 rounds. AI Yao smiled bitterly and said, My first round of attacks. If you didn't help me, I wouldn't have been able to break it. Sigh, I really would have died here. Lei Xingfeng said, "Forget it. You're lucky. I'm just curious. Since entering Nameless Peak, I've only met you. I haven't even seen a shadow of anyone else." AI Yao suddenly thought of a problem. He said, "That's right. After entering Nameless Peak, you basically wouldn't meet anyone. How did you find me?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Who's looking for you? I just bumped into you. If you didn't bump into me, you'd be in big trouble." AI Yao said, "That's not what I meant. I meant that in Nameless Peak, there isn't a single path that's connected. It's impossible to meet anyone else. How did you end up on my path?" Chapter 920. Lei Xingfeng said, "How would I know? When I came out, I saw you being beaten up like a dog and being chased by the restriction people. I thought it was strange. Who is this expert? I didn't expect it to be someone I know." AI Yao's face turned red. "Hey, that's too harsh. What do you mean by beaten up like a dog? Do I look like a dog?" Lei Xingfeng smiled. Not bad, not bad. Even if you don't look like a dog, you're still in a sorry state." AI Yao shook his head and smiled bitterly. Actually, he also knew that he was in a worse state than a dog when he was chased by the restriction people. He was almost tortured to death. In fact, Lei Xingfeng didn't walk the path he should have. He relied on his understanding of restrictions and the protection of the mirror realm. If something went wrong, he could just leave. Therefore, he was very brave. He dared to walk the path that others didn't dare to walk. He dared to barge in, so it wasn't strange to see AI Yao. However, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't tell AI Yao that. He smiled and said, "The harvest is decided. We'll split it 20 to 80. Do you have any objections?" Actually, he didn't need to care whether AI Yao had any objections or not. However, Lei Xingfeng didn't really want the two of them to move together, so he said it on purpose to see AI Yao's reaction. AI Yao didn't want to go with Lei Xingfeng, but after seeing Lei Xingfeng's powerful restriction-breaking ability, he knew that he would gain more if he followed Lei Xingfeng. Even if it was only 20 to 80, it would be better than barging in alone. After hesitating, AI Yao said, "Okay, 20 to 80. I'll follow you." Lei Xingfeng thought about it. With a six-ring expert by his side, at least they would encounter danger. Two people would be better than one. Okay, but there's one condition. If you follow me, you have to listen to my orders. Lei Xingfeng asked for the right to command without hesitation. AI Yao said, "You'll command?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Of course I'll command. Are you proficient in restrictions? If you're proficient in restrictions, then you'll command." AI Yao thought about it and agreed. She only knew a little about restrictions and was far from being proficient in them. Moreover, this place was filled with restrictions. It would be more reliable for someone proficient in restrictions to command them. All right, you do it. AI Yao was still feeling very sullen. He was a sixth ring, true body expert, yet he was being commanded by a little brat. But thinking back to when he was with Lei Xingfeng, he really didn't have the upper hand. He was always suppressed by the little brat. Lei Xingfeng said, "Then let's go. We'll pass through this restriction." AI Yao said, "The restrictions have all been broken." Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "Yes, but it won't take long for this place to recover. However, it will take a long time to recover to its peak." AI Yao said in shock, "You can recover from this? Wasn't it broken?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Of course it can be restored. The restriction here is the same as the restriction in the seal." AI Yao didn't understand at all. She muttered in her heart, "Same as the seal? What's the same as the seal?" As a sixth ring, true body expert, she was too embarrassed to ask. The two of them quickly passed through the restriction. There were quite a few good things in this area. The two of them searched for a bit, and according to their agreement, Xine Feng took 80% while AI Yao took 20%. Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao happily collected all kinds of materials. A large amount of materials appeared as if they were rewards, especially some rare lightning-type materials. Lei Xingfeng was very surprised. This was another canyon. The two walked along the canyon. There were all kinds of materials on the ground. They didn't even need to dig them up. They just needed to pick them up. The quality was surprisingly good. In fact, Lei Xingfeng didn't deliberately split them 80%. Most of the materials were picked up by them and kept by them. However, if there were lightning-type materials, they had to take them. AI Yao could see Lei Xingfeng's thoughts, so as long as it was a lightning-type material, he would give it up. Along the way, AI Yao said, "I don't know if there are any energy crystals. I used a bit too much this time. I need to replenish some." Lei Xingfeng said, "I have a lot of energy crystals. If you have any lightning-type materials to trade, I can take them out." AI Yao searched through the hidden Luin space, only to find that although there were quite a few lightning-type materials, if they were to be used to exchange, the amount was far from enough. Even if it wasn't enough, it was better to have more. AI Yao placed all the lightning-type materials he collected in front of Lei Xingfeng and said, "I only have this much. You can trade as you see fit." Lei Xingfeng was too lazy to identify them. He put the materials into his Luin Chang space and took out a pile of energy crystals. He said, "Is this enough?" AI Yao said, "It's enough for the trade, but it's far for what I need." Lei Xingfeng smiled. "This place is a treasure trove. It depends on how you search. As long as you find a place with energy crystals, you should be able to get what you need." The quality of the energy crystals here was very good. As long as they were found, they were all top-quality goods. After replenishing some energy crystals, Mo Yao was clearly in a much better state. He had been tortured to the brink of insanity by the restriction man, and this was the first time his energy crystals had dropped to a dangerous level. For a cultivator, especially a high-level cultivator, without energy, they would have no combat strength. This was the most basic common sense that everyone knew. Even if there were no materials, there couldn't be no energy. Once there was no energy, it was like a car running out of gas or a cannon running out of ammo. Practitioners couldn't even release their true body. Practitioners would always hide a batch of energy as a last resort. Unless it was absolutely necessary, they wouldn't use it. Lei Xingfeng had this habit. He had a batch of top-quality energy in his Luin Chang space. Lane also had a batch of top-quality energy. Unless he was at his wit's end, he wouldn't use this energy. This was life-saving energy. Actually, AI Yao also had it. However, in the previous battle, he had already started to use it. That was why he was so anxious to trade with Lei Xingfeng. He had to ensure that he could continue fighting. Otherwise, it would be too dangerous here. As they walked down the canyon, Lei Xingfeng said, "Old AI, why are there canyons everywhere?" AI Yao said, "You can go up. The canyons here are all cracks on Nameless Peak. It's just that this crack is very big. Didn't you see it from the outside?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I noticed it. It's a very small crack." AI Yao said, "That's right. Let me tell you, from where we came into Nameless Peak, it's actually very far. It's just that it's isolated by the restriction. If it wasn't isolated by the restriction, with our flying speed, it would take about a few hundred days." Lei Xingfeng was shocked. "That's like passing through a continent." AI Yao said, "It's much wider than a continent. I'm talking about flying at full speed. It has to be a practitioner of our level." Lei Xingfeng said, "That's so far away." AI Yao said, "So it's impossible to understand the vastness of this place before coming up, from where we were just now. If you look from afar, you wouldn't be able to see it at all." Lei Xingfeng said, "What exactly is paradise?" This question had always been in his heart, but he just couldn't find anyone to ask. AI Yao said, "Paradise. It said that if you find the right spot, your strength can reach unimaginable heights. However, there's a prerequisite. You have to be a 9th ring sage." Haha, so we're only here to find materials and energy. Most importantly, we're here to find spiritual items. Don't think about anything else. It's impossible. 9th ring sage. Lei Xingfeng instantly lost all his thoughts. A 9th ring sage wasn't something he could imagine. It required 9 seals. In Lei Xingfeng's mind, it was almost impossible. AI Yao saw Lei Xingfeng shake his head and couldn't help but laugh. People who hear this for the first time are all like this. Lei Xingfeng said, "Has anyone succeeded?" AI Yao said, "Yes, it said that some people have succeeded. However, it's just hearsay. There are real high-level cultivators in the core areas of paradise. They usually don't leave paradise." Lei Xingfeng said, "What kind of cultivators?" AI Yao said, "Cultivators with 7th ring and above will almost always go there. That's their hope." Lei Xingfeng said, "Is this also the core area?" AI Yao nodded. "It's near the peak. We're only active from the foot to the middle of the mountain. We can't go up." Lei Xingfeng said, "That's not necessarily true. Maybe we can go up." AI Yao said, "Stop dreaming. Many people have the same idea. Many people have died because of it. The restrictions here are more perverted the higher you go. You really can't say for sure. You're proficient in restrictions. Maybe there's hope." AI Yao's voice became softer and softer. Her eyes flashed with an unknown light. Lei Xingfeng said, "We can try. But what benefits will there be after going up?" If there were no benefits, he didn't want to go up desperately. AI Yao said, "Benefits? That's not just a matter of benefits. It's a place that can allow people to advance quickly. Oh, maybe I could try it with you." Lei Xingfeng was puzzled. "Advance quickly? How is that possible?" AI Yao said, "I've only heard about it, but there are definitely benefits. Of course, the danger will also increase countless times." Lei Xingfeng said, "There's a saying in my hometown, wealth comes from danger. If you don't take risks, how can you gain anything? I plan to go up. What about you?" He wanted to bring AI Yao along. No matter what, she was a 6th ring true body. She was much stronger than him. With her around, the exploration would be safer. AI Yao thought for a moment and said, "Originally, I planned to leave as long as I found a spiritual item. Since you want to go up, then let's go together. Also, you have to solve the restriction problem. If you can't solve the restriction problem, we can't go up." Chapter 921. Lei Xingfeng said confidently, "Leave it to me. The restriction barrier is not a big problem for me." AI Yao smiled and said, "All right, as long as there is no problem with the restriction, I am confident that we can go up. Even if it is just 1 level, it will be of great help to us." Xian Feng's interest was piqued. He wanted to see what would happen if he went up. Raising his head, he looked at the restrictions on the cliff. Even if he was proficient in restrictions, he didn't dare to provoke the restrictions on the cliff. That was a gigantic restriction that covered the entire nameless mountain. This was something he had gradually understood after walking for so long. After understanding this, Lei Xingfeng was so scared that he broke out in cold sweat. He had wanted to go up and take a look. Fortunately, he was cautious and did not act on it. Now that he understood, he knew that going up the cliff like this was courting death. Soon, they came to a huge open space. Lei Xingfeng could clearly see that there was a path up and a path down. In the middle, there was a restriction. This meant that they could go down the path, but to go up, they had to go through the restriction area. Lei Xingfeng pointed to the gap in the distance and said, "This is the path up, right?" AI Yao smiled and said, "Yes, this is it. The path that we came through just now was a checkpoint. I actually regret coming up. Look, I almost died because of that strange restriction, and there's actually a restriction person." Lei Xingfeng said, "After touching this restriction, there are no restriction people." "Oh, there are still restriction people, but they can't come out and fight in the restriction? Holy sh*t. This restriction is quite abnormal." AI Yao said, "What?" Lei Xingfeng said, "This seems to be a huge checkpoint. There are a series of restrictions, one layer over another. One layer is the restriction we saw last time. The others are illusion arrays and killing arrays. There's also a teleportation array. This is too crazy. How can we get through?" AI Yao did not care about the restriction array. He was more concerned about whether they could get through this time. He asked, "Can we get through?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I don't know. Going up is too hard. It's always been like this. However, if we can get past this phone, we might meet a 7-ring sage body cultivator." Mo Yao sighed and said, "Who knows? We might meet a 7-ring sage body cultivator." Lei Xingfeng's heart tightened as he said, 7 rings. Won't we be in danger?" AI Yao said, "If you don't provoke a cultivator with 7 true ring bodies, you won't be in any danger. They won't attack us unless you're tired of living and provoke them." Haha, I believe we're not that stupid. Xian Feng nodded. It was impossible for him to provoke a 7th ring true body expert for no reason. With his cautious nature, if he met a 7th ring true body practitioner, the chances of him avoiding would be higher. The two of them stopped at the outer area of the large restriction circle. Xian Feng was still observing. He had already found 3 restriction circles that blocked their path. Just as the two stood outside the restriction circle, countless restriction nodes suddenly flew out from the restriction circle. Lei Xingfeng retreated in shock. However, AI Yao could not see the restriction nodes and stood there stupidly. Lei Xingfeng had never seen restriction nodes that could fly out of a restriction array. This greatly shocked him. His first reaction was to not touch them. Therefore, he did not even think about it and flew back as fast as lightning. AI Yao was stupefied. He didn't expect Xian Feng to suddenly retreat, and his speed was so fast that he couldn't react in time. Xian Feng then shouted, "Release your true body." When AI Yao heard this, he did not hesitate to release his true body. He knew that the two of them had to work together. Lei Xingfeng had no reason to lie to him. As soon as he released his true body, the restriction circle completely erupted. In an instant, AI Yao was dragged into the restriction circle. Lei Xingfeng shouted from behind, "Steady! Stay where you are and don't move." AI Yao cursed inwardly. He also wanted to stand there without moving, but the might of the array formation directly wrapped around him. He was instantly pulled into the array formation. In an instant, the surrounding scenery completely changed. AI Yao could still tell that this was an illusion formation. However, although he knew, he did not know how to break it. According to his previous habits, if he directly attacked, he might have a chance to charge out. However, the restriction here was different. It was so powerful that even with his 6th ring sage body, he might not be able to break it. Lei Xingfeng retreated too quickly. Even if the restriction circle hit him, it was ignored by his spatial technique. It was unable to trigger the restriction circle to attack him. Seeing AI Yao being dragged into the large formation, Xian Feng couldn't help but sigh to himself. This restriction was too perverted, It actually had such a strange method, it was simply impossible to guard against. AI Yao knew that the illusion formation would not harm him. However, the illusion formation here had a special characteristic. No matter where he went, he would definitely fall into a trap. In other words, he would enter another attack formation. The function of the illusion formation was to mislead you into a trap. No matter how you struggled, you would not be able to escape unless you could see through the entire restriction. The only one with such ability was Xian Feng. AI Yao didn't have the ability to escape unless he forced his way in. Ever since the last time he forced his way in, he knew what it felt like. He was almost killed. Therefore, when AI Yao felt that he was standing on solid ground, he did not dare to move. He stood firmly in place and ignored the various illusions. This was also why he remembered Lei Xingfeng's words. Stay in place and do not move. AI Yao desperately stabilized his true body. He even closed his eyes and did not look at his surroundings. He could clearly feel that there were countless forces moving around his true body. These forces were causing him to misjudge his surroundings. Fortunately, he was still clear that he could not believe everything around him. Lei Xingfeng watched as the restriction circle revolved. However, he soon discovered that only the outer layer of the restriction circle revolved. The inner layers of the restriction circle did not move at all. In other words, unless Mo Yao charged in, the illusion formation would be activated and nothing else would move, which made Xian Feng dumbfounded. Once AI Yao fell into the illusion formation, even if Lei Xingfeng shouted himself hoarse, AI Yao would not be able to hear him. Even the surrounding environment had changed. His voice could not be transmitted. With a sigh, Lei Xingfeng could only release his true body and charge into the illusion formation. Fortunately, Lei Xingfeng could see through the restriction circle. All the illusions could not affect him. Soon, he found AI Yao and came to his side. He grabbed AI Yao's thick arm and said, "All right, don't close your eyes. Let's charge in together." The illusion formation did not have any lethality. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng led AI Yao and walked in. AI Yao would occasionally cry out strangely. This was because he found himself crashing into the cliff. However, after crashing into it, the surrounding environment changed. Gradually, he understood that Lei Xingfeng knew the path. Lei Xingfeng walked in a straight line. A straight line was the fastest, especially when he charged forward without any restraint and did not care about the illusions brought about by the illusion formation. His speed was very fast. After a while, the two of them walked out of the illusion formation. The illusion formation was very close to the next restriction circle. The distance between the two was less than 10 meters. One had to know that the two of them were in their true bodies. Their true bodies were more than 100 meters tall. The distance of 10 meters was actually a very narrow space. The two of them could only stand side by side. If one of them stood in front and the other behind, the person in front would definitely touch the restriction. Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "We are out." AI Yao obviously knew that they had walked out. The scenery suddenly changed. He saw the familiar surroundings again. However, he found that the original place was already quite far behind him. Should we continue charging? Lei Xingfeng smiled bitterly and said, "Charge my ass. How can we charge? Let me observe for a while and see what the next restriction is." AI Yao looked back and said, "The restriction just now seems to have calmed down." Lei Xingfeng said, "Of course. The two of us came out and did not touch the restriction in front. This way, it will not cause a chain reaction. The illusion formation will slowly calm down." AI Yao said, "What does this have to do with continuing to charge?" Lei Xingfeng said, "If we charge into the next formation before the illusion formation calms down, then the illusion formation will erupt with the next formation. If you fight with the restriction circle again, then many of the attacks will have illusions. I believe that you do not want to enjoy such treatment." AI Yao could not help but shiver. Illusions meant that he would not be able to determine the restriction circle's attack. He would not be able to determine which was a real attack and which was a fake attack. At that time, he would probably go crazy. AI Yao immediately did not dare to move. He stood there obediently with his hands in his chest. He did his best to not accidentally touch the restriction. Lei Xingfeng carefully stared at the formation in front of them. After calculating for a long time, he said, "If it is just an attack formation, we should have no problem going through. However, there are still restriction people in this restriction circle. Once they are formed, they will entangle us. How do we get rid of them?" AI Yao said, "There are restriction people?" He was really a little afraid of restriction people. These things were not afraid of pain or death. Even if they were destroyed, they would be quickly created by the restriction circle again. It was simply a headache. Lei Xingfeng said, "The restriction people in the formation are not that bad. The key is that there are other attacks. Later, I will set up a few small blocking restrictions. Otherwise, your combat strength will be wasted." AI Yao said, "What do you mean?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I have to cut off the connection between the illusion formation and the formation inside. Otherwise, you will not be able to distinguish between illusions and real attacks. If you can't even see the path, how can you play?" AI Yao could not help but shake his head. He said, "What you said makes sense. At least let me know where the enemy is and where the attack is. Otherwise, it will be really hard to go through." Lei Xingfeng said, "You have to protect me." AI Yao said, "I know." Lei Xingfeng said, "What do you know? What I mean is that you have to protect me now, because I will withdraw my true body. Once there is an attack, you have to block it immediately. Understand?" AI Yao was shocked. He said, "Ah, now?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Nonsense, of course now. It will be a while before we enter the restriction circle." AI Yao said, "All right, no problem. Leave it to me. However, don't run too far. Move within my range." Chapter 922. Lei Xingfeng said, "Just listen to me. If I tell you to move, then move. If I tell you to stop, then stop. Since I'm a commander, you just have to listen to my orders." AI Yao felt wronged as she agreed. She was a sixth ring true body expert. Being commanded by a little fellow was a bit unpleasant. However, she was still lacking in terms of restrictions, so she could only agree. "Okay, I got it." Lei Xingfeng nodded. Then, he withdrew his true body and carefully walked to a place. Then, he began to set up a restriction formation. It was a very small but very effective restriction formation. It could cut off the connection between the illusion formation and the large formation below. As long as a few connection points were cut off, the illusion formation wouldn't operate smoothly. This would give the two of them an opportunity. After setting up a few small restriction formations, Lei Xingfeng let out a sigh of relief. If the illusion formation was combined with the inner circle's restriction attack formation, he would be fine because he could see through the restriction. However, AI Yao was a pain in the ass. If he couldn't see clearly, it was normal for her to hit him. Looking at the restriction formation in the inner circle, Lei Xingfeng bitterly smiled. The complexity of the restriction gave him a headache. Therefore, he had to design a path. If he followed the path, it might be slightly better. If Lei Xingfeng attacked the formation alone, he had many methods to use. However, bringing AI Yao along was equivalent to bringing a burden. However, this burden couldn't be thrown away. Who knew what they would encounter when they went up? Perhaps the most dangerous thing wasn't the restriction, but something else. At that time, AI Yao would be very useful. Passing through the restriction was Lei Xingfeng's mission. Then, entering other areas was AI Yao's mission. Therefore, he had to bring AI Yao along. After analyzing a few times, Lei Xingfeng vaguely found a path. However, he didn't know how much trouble this path could reduce, but it was definitely better than charging directly. There were a few empty spots that he could use. AI Yao said, "How is it? Can we charge?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Wait a moment." As he spoke, he released his real body and said, "Old AI, you are strong, so you have to charge in front and block the attacks. Listen to my instructions. Well, no matter what is in front, if I say go forward, go left, go right, and retreat. Do you understand?" AI Yao said, "As long as you have the confidence to charge through, there won't be any problems. I will listen to all your commands." Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay, let's start preparing. It's best if you have a weapon, but if you don't, then forget it." Wormwood said, "Weapons? What weapon?" Lei Xingfeng said, For example, a large steel shield or a giant steel club. Either will do. Wormwood said, "Shield? I have a thick steel plate here. Can you use it?" Lei Xingfeng asked, "Is there a place to grab?" Wormwood said, "Yes. There's a place to grab." He took out a giant steel object. Lei Xingfeng was stunned when he saw it. How is this a steel shield? This thing was an enlarged dustpan. It was super big and looked a bit like the bucket of a forklift. He said in surprise, "This is for mining?" Wormwood said, "I used it before, but I felt that it was more suitable to use my hands to dig. I only used it for a short while and forgot about it in the hidden ruin space." Lei Xingfeng looked at it. There were indeed two handles and a short handle. Anyway, it looked weird. He said, "Okay, we will use this to open a path and use it to block in front of us." He took out the giant steel club and said, "Charge through here." The two came to the place where they were about to charge through the restriction. Wormwood did not hesitate to step in. The entire restriction array was activated. Lei Xingfeng saw Wormwood hit countless restriction nodes. The entire array was activated. Lei Xingfeng looked back. As expected, the illusion array was activated. However, the key areas were blocked by Lei Xingfeng's restriction. The restriction's influence could not pass through. Lei Xingfeng shouted, "Speed up, charge forward." Wormwood took large strides forward. He held the steel dustpan in front of him and strode forward. At first, it was still okay. After about 10 steps, a giant fireball smashed over. Wormwood shouted and raised his dustpan to smash it. Boom! Wormwood's footsteps paused. Lei Xingfeng shouted, "Don't stop, continue charging." After another 2 steps, another giant fireball came. Lei Xingfeng said, "Block it." Boom! Heat waves surged. Lei Xingfeng shouted, "Take 3 steps to the left and 2 steps forward." Wormwood heard him and took 3 steps to the left and 2 steps forward. Lei Xingfeng held the club with both hands and stabbed it into the ground. He then used his strength to lift it up. Instantly, a huge clump of soil flew up and hit a fireball that was flying over. Suddenly, the restrictions in the surroundings paused. Lei Xingfeng had already dug out a restriction hub. Of course, this was not the main hub. It was the restriction hub of this area. It could reduce the power of the restrictions in the surroundings. Wormwood said, "How do we go?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Continue forward, continue forward." Wormwood strode forward and continuously blocked the fireballs that were flying over. Immediately after, a giant stone wall appeared. Lei Xingfeng shouted, "Crash into it." Wormwood crashed into it. There was an instant explosion, and the stone wall suddenly collapsed. The two of them had just passed the stone wall when a giant pit suddenly appeared on the ground behind them. Lei Xingfeng was so scared that he broke out in cold sweat. He said, "Don't stop, continue forward." As he spoke, he used the steel club to hit the fireballs that were flying over. Lei Xingfeng understood that this was the most basic attack. It was not the most powerful attack of the restriction array. Its main purpose was to delay the people that entered the array. Fortunately, Wormwood had Lei Xingfeng's guidance. He did not dare to stop at all. Under Lei Xingfeng's urging, he took huge steps and rushed forward with all his might. "Left!" Lei Xingfeng shouted. "Take 2 steps to the left and continue forward." In the blink of an eye, a pit appeared on the right. Although it wasn't big, if one stepped into it, they would definitely trip. AI Yao's heart trembled when he saw this. A thought flashed through his mind. How could he have known that there would be a pit here? Immediately after, fireballs continuously shot from all directions and hit the two of them. However, with Wormwood blocking in front, Lei Xingfeng felt much better. This level of attack could not shake the defenses of the two of them. It was just that the fireballs would consume a bit of energy when they hit the body. The two of them did not mind. Lei Xingfeng stabbed the steel club into the ground from time to time and then lifted the ground. Every time, he could break a restriction node. As they continued forward, the attacks behind them were obviously weaker. Lei Xingfeng knew that if the restriction nodes were destroyed, the offensive power of the restriction array would naturally be reduced. Of course, this was only to reduce the attacks behind them. The attacks in front of them were not only not reduced, but also became stronger. Following the bombardment of fireballs, The weapon in Wormwood's hand started to turn red and soft. Lei Xingfeng could even see the fiery red molten steel dripping down. Finally, a restriction person started to take shape not far away. Lei Xingfeng shouted, "Rush towards that person! Quick, quick, quick!" Wormwood rushed forward with all his might. In just a few breaths, he had rushed to the front of the restriction person that was about to take shape. Lei Xingfeng did not even have time to say anything before the steel club stabbed out and instantly pierced through the restriction person's body. Wormwood then raised his dipper and smashed down fiercely. Boom! It was a loud sound. Before the restriction person could take shape, it was forcefully smashed into pieces. Lei Xingfeng looked around and immediately found the key point. He shouted, "Go to the left, quick!" Wormwood heard him and walked a few steps to the left. Lei Xingfeng rushed forward and stabbed his steel club into the ground. With a shout, he lifted it up fiercely and instantly broke a key restriction node. Instantly, the place where the restriction person exploded had another explosion. Wormwood looked back and saw another restriction person that was about to take shape suddenly exploding. He said in surprise, "Wah, it can't be regenerated." "Huh?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Let's go. Let's go. Don't be happy too early. Let's go." The two of them moved forward again. Before long, another restriction person was taking shape. Lei Xingfeng said, "You go and restrain it. I will go and settle it." Wormwood didn't understand what restrain was. However, he knew that Lei Xingfeng was referring to the restriction person that was about to take shape. He said, "Okay, I will go." Lei Xingfeng rushed to the right. There were flames everywhere. There were fireballs constantly shooting over or falling from the sky. Lei Xingfeng didn't care. He took a few steps and arrived in front of a huge rock. He raised his huge club and smashed it down. Boom! That huge rock let out a dense cracking sound. Lei Xingfeng smashed it down again, and the huge rock collapsed. Then, Lei Xingfeng saw a red light shoot out. He raised his hand and grabbed it. Then, he saw a long red crystal land in his hand. Lei Xingfeng instantly understood what he grabbed. Fire-type spirit item. Before he could even react, a huge fireball smashed onto his head. Lei Xingfeng didn't care and kept the crystal that contained the fire-type spirit item into his hidden Lun space. Then, he waved his club and ran towards Wormwood. Lei Xingfeng swatted away the incoming fireballs while observing the restrictions. He knew that if the arrangements were made properly, they would have a chance to force their way through. The ground was covered in flames. Under the crazy burning, Lei Xingfeng had to expend energy to resist. However, these flames were useless against Wormwood. Only when the huge fireballs smashed onto Wormwood's body would he expend a bit of energy. The defense of a six-ring true body was definitely not something that Lei Xingfeng's true body could compare with. Therefore, he had to stay behind Wormwood to conserve energy, especially those glowing blue fireballs. Every time Lei Xingfeng saw them, he would feel a chill down his spine. He knew that these things were a threat to him. Soon, Lei Xingfeng ran behind Wormwood and said, "Continue, continue, don't stop." AI Yao immediately ran forward. Then, he saw the 4 restriction humans taking shape. Moreover, they were on the way. Chapter 923. Lei Xingfeng said, "Quick, you have to kill at least 2 of them. Also, you have to hold back the remaining 2. Moby Demon agreed. He was going all out. He knew that once a restriction person was formed, it would be extremely difficult to deal with. Therefore, even if Lei Xingfeng did not order him to go, he would still go all out. Lei Xingfeng's mission was not simple either. That was to find the restriction pivot points. These small restriction pivots were scattered throughout the restriction. Almost every restriction pivot was a small restriction array. As long as it was broken, it could reduce part of the restriction's power. Moby Demon rushed in front of a restriction person that had not yet formed. He raised the dipper in his hand and smashed it down. With a loud bang, this restriction person was smashed to pieces. Moby Demon's dipper was already in tatters. It was softened by the high temperature. Coupled with the heavy smashing, it was already deformed. It looked like a messy steel product. Looking at the dipper in his hand, Moby Demon rushed a few steps forward and smashed it out. The dipper whizzed towards another restriction person that had not yet formed. In an instant, it was smashed to pieces. There were only 2 restrictions left. One of them was about to succeed, and the other was only half formed. Actually, the speed at which a restriction person was formed was not slow. It only took 1 or 2 minutes. Moby Demon hesitated for a moment before running towards the second restriction person. After all, it was only half formed. He had time to reach it. In less than 10 seconds, Lei Xingfeng rushed in front of him. He had already thrown away the dipper. He did not have a weapon in his hand. However, he was more used to using his fists. His strength was also greater. The strength of his attacks was also easier to control. With a punch, Moby Demon knew that this was not the time to conserve energy. He used all his strength in this punch. The restriction golem that was not fully formed completely exploded, and Zhao Fu rushed over to the last restriction golem. However, it was too late. The restriction golem had been fully formed, and it swung its arm and punched out towards Zhao Fu's punch. Lei Xingfeng destroyed the restriction pivot points one by one. Although these restriction pivot points were not important and were just ordinary restriction pivot points, destroying one would reduce the intensity of the surrounding attacks. This meant that only Lei Xingfeng could find them. If it was other cultivators, it would be completely different. They could only force their way through and would not be able to resolve the restriction attacks like Lei Xingfeng. After destroying the restriction pivot points with the steel rod, the intensity of the surrounding attacks gradually weakened. After a moment, Lei Xingfeng came to Moby Demon's side and said, "Kill him quickly." That restriction person was very difficult. Demon. Moby Demon said, "He uses the power of restriction. I can't kill him." Moby Demon's rods to the restriction person to 2. The restriction person to the restriction person to retreat. Moby Demon person. Demon person could not stand to Moby Demon to 2. 2. To Moto Demon to him. This gave Moby Demon a chance. She suddenly kicked out and aimed at the restriction person's head. The restriction person tried to raise his arms to block, but was deflected by Lei Xingfeng's rod. Moby Demon's foot landed on the restriction person's head. This kick caused the restriction person to lie down. Moby Demon rushed forward and stomped her foot. Lei Xingfeng's steel rod also smashed down. The 2 of them worked together and instantly destroyed the restriction person. Moby Demon said, "This restriction person is much more difficult to deal with inside the restriction than outside." Lei Xingfeng laughed. "Of course, as long as it is not destroyed in one blow, he will be able to replenish it in a few seconds." This was also the reason why Lei Xingfeng insisted on bringing Moby Demon along. He could not destroy the restriction person in one blow. The 2 of them exchanged a few words and immediately continued forward. This was not the place to talk. After a while, the 2 of them broke through the second restriction. This was also an empty belt about 10 meters wide. Lei Xingfeng stepped on it and immediately said, "Protect me." Moby Demon immediately understood what he meant. She said, "Where?" Lei Xingfeng pointed to the ground and said, "Here." Moby Demon immediately squatted down. Lei Xingfeng withdrew his true body. Moby Demon placed her 2 huge palms on the ground. Like catching crickets, she formed a circle and covered it. Lei Xingfeng quickly set up a restriction and said, "Hand." Moby Demon opened her palms. Lei Xingfeng jumped on and said, "Let's go." After taking a few steps along the empty belt, Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay, put it down." At this moment, if Moby Demon wanted to take Lei Xingfeng's life, it would be very easy. As long as she clenched her palms, Lei Xingfeng would definitely explode. However, Moby Demon did not have such thoughts. If Lei Xingfeng was not here, Moby Demon did not know if she could pass through this restriction. Lei Xingfeng placed Moby Demon carefully on the ground and quickly set up an isolation restriction. The 2 of them worked together. Lei Xingfeng set up about 5 isolation restriction arrays. This way, the restriction that just passed through would not affect the next restriction array. When Lei Xingfeng released his true body, Moby Demon looked back and could not help but exclaim, "A phone look!" From the restriction behind them, there were already more than 10 restriction people. They walked through the restriction and were about to get close. Moby Demon said, "What do we do?" Lei Xingfeng took a glance and smiled. "Fortunately, we are fast. Let's go. We will enter the restriction array here." When the two of them stepped into the restriction array, AI Yao purposely turned around to look. She saw that when the restriction people walked to the edge of the empty zone, they couldn't step out no matter how hard they tried. This scene was very strange. It was as if they were walking in place. Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't look, they're disturbed by the restriction. They can't pass through." Moby Demon heaved a sigh of relief and said, "They would have caught up if we were slower. Why didn't we see so many restriction people just now?" Lei Xingfeng said, "They rushed over from other places. It's just that we are fast. Hee, if I didn't set up the isolation restriction array in time, they would have passed through the empty belt and entered this restriction. At that time, we would be very annoyed. Moreover, their reinforcements would keep coming. You wouldn't be able to control their formation." Moby Demon said, let's go. It looks scary." Before they walked far, the surrounding scenery suddenly changed. He said in shock, "It's an illusion array again." Lei Xingfeng said, "It's okay, I will lead you." The illusion array restriction was actually not very powerful. However, its ability to mislead was top-notch. If Lei Xingfeng was not here, even if Moby Demon broke through the restriction array in the middle, he would still be misled back. This was the effect of the restriction array on both sides. Therefore, people who could not see through the restriction array would be tortured to death. No matter how you walked, you would still end up in the middle of the restriction array. There are all kinds of attacks and countless restriction people. Even if your strength was outstanding, you would still be exhausted and eventually be annihilated in the restriction array. Only people like Lei Xingfeng who were truly proficient in restriction arrays and relied on his unique pair of eyes could truly see through the illusion array and walk out smoothly. Lei Xingfeng took out the steel rod and said, "Hold on." Then, like a blind person, Moby Demon was led by Lei Xingfeng. Because this was not an attack array and there were no restriction people to disturb them, they walked out smoothly. When Moby Demon stepped out of the illusion array, the scenery in front of him changed back to the familiar scene. He sighed and said, I can't come over alone. This restriction array is too perverse." Moby Demon looked back with lingering fear and said, "No wonder they say you can't go up and can only go down. As expected, if you rely on your own strength, going up is courting death." Lei Xingfeng said, "Then why did you go up?" Moby Demon said, "I needed a spirit item and a large amount of materials. Although going up is courting death, I didn't know it was so powerful. I thought that if I was lucky enough to pass through, my gains would be different." Lei Xingfeng said, "All right. Logically speaking, you wouldn't be able to pass through the first restriction array. You'd be beaten up by the restriction people. You can't do it. Let alone this restriction array. You wouldn't be able to deal with the previous restriction array either." Moby Demon said, "The first restriction array, although there are many restriction people and it's a cycle production, it's not unsolvable." Lei Xingfeng said, "How do you solve it?" Moby Demon said, "As long as I completely give up and go through, will these restriction people follow me? Even if they follow me, I have other ways to completely eliminate them." Lei Xingfeng pursed his lips. He almost said that Moby Demon was beaten up like a dog by the restriction people. He said, "According to my estimation, other than the first restriction array and the restriction array we just went through, there should be another restriction array. Only then will we have gains. The next restriction array won't be so easy to pass through." Moby Demon laughed and said, "You're here, aren't you? Hee, I never thought that there would be someone so proficient in restrictions. It's my gain, huh?" Lei Xingfeng was speechless. He shook his head and said, "Passing this restriction array doesn't mean we can pass through the next one. We'll only know when we see it." Moby Demon said, "There should be some benefits to this restriction array, right?" Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "There will be benefits, but the benefits won't be too great. I estimate that if we pass through the next restriction array, there will be real benefits." Moby Demon said, "Let's see what's there. Let's continue going up." It was a very small path. The cliffs on both sides couldn't even see the top. There was almost no light in the passage. Lei Xingfeng released a thunderball and led the way. This was the only path. They had looked around. This was the only path, so they had to go from here. As for the dangers ahead, the two didn't care. There were materials on this path. They were all on the cliffs on both sides. As long as they were excavated, there would be materials. However, there were very few of them, but every one of them was a top-quality material. Therefore, Moby Demon saw Lei Xingfeng stopping from time to time. He held a tool in his hand and smashed the cliffs to collect materials. Moby Demon also tried to find materials on the cliffs, but they were all green. Why was it that when he dug, there was nothing? However, every time Lei Xingfeng made a move, he would find something good. This was driving him crazy. Chapter 924. Why? This doesn't make sense. Why is it that when you dig, there will be something, but when I dig, there won't be anything? Lei Xingfeng spat out two words, moral quality. AI Yao was tongue-tied. This was also a reason. He dug around with hatred. If he was in front of Lei Xingfeng, he might be able to find a few treasures. However, Lei Xingfeng was in front of him. How could he miss anything? Of course, he couldn't find anything. As he dug along the way, there was no lack of materials that Lei Xingfeng urgently needed. They were all supreme-grade materials, making Lei Xingfeng feel that all his previous hard work was worth it. From start to finish, Lei Xingfeng had dug up more than 200 treasures. 90% of them were supreme-grade materials, and the remaining 20% were treasure-grade materials. Although he didn't obtain any phase, Lei Xingfeng was very satisfied. When one person was satisfied, the other person would definitely be dissatisfied. AI Yao finished walking this long and narrow path. Unfortunately, he didn't obtain anything even though he had dug along the way. He looked on helplessly as Lei Xingfeng dug out the materials one by one and kept them. AI Yao's eyes were about to turn red, but he couldn't say anything. However, AI Yao found something strange. Every time Lei Xingfeng dug, there would be a harvest. It was as if he knew where the treasures were in the stone wall and where the treasures were empty. This made AI Yao very shocked. AI Yao endured and endured, but he couldn't hold it in anymore. He said, "How do you know that there are good things in the stone wall?" Lei Xingfeng grinned and said, "Intuition." AI Yao was instantly speechless. This was intuition? Who was he trying to fool? AI Yao said, "How can it be intuition?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Why can't it be intuition? If it isn't intuition, then tell me. Why do I find treasures when I dig, but you don't?" That's right. Not only do I have intuition, but I also have moral quality. My moral quality is good. AI Yao was almost angered to death. If your moral quality is good, you will find treasures when you dig, but if my moral quality isn't good, why can't I dig? Lei Xingfeng chuckled, looking very pleased with himself. AI Yao snorted. "Kid, although you're very strong and even made me admire you when you only had 4 true ring bodies, aren't you afraid of angering me by being so infuriating?" Lei Xingfeng stared at him. After a while, he couldn't help but laugh. "Will you fall out with me?" AI Yao had an angry look on his face as he said, "I will." "Forget it, I won't." He suddenly remembered that if he wanted to continue moving forward and have a falling out with Lei Xingfeng, this would be the worst choice. Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "Isn't that it? Since you won't fall out with me, what's so great about letting you be jealous of me?" "Huh." AI Yao muttered the words envy, jealousy, and hate before finally nodding and saying, "I really am envious, jealous, and hateful." Lei Xingfeng said, we'll each collect with our own abilities. Of course, you have to give me 80% of your harvest." AI Yao then remembered that he had another agreement with Lei Xingfeng. He immediately deflated and said, "Everything you get is yours. I still have to give you 80% of my harvest." Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "Don't say that you're not willing." AI Yao sighed and said, "Don't worry, I'll definitely keep my promise." The consequences of not keeping his promise were very serious. AI Yao wasn't stupid and obviously knew that he couldn't go back on his word. A blue light came from afar. Lei Xingfeng said, I see the light. No, why is it blue? AI Yao also saw the blue light, and his expression changed. He said, "It can't be. Let's go." Lei Xingfeng was pushed forward by AI Yao. He said, "It can't be what?" AI Yao said, "We'll know when we get there. Quick, quick, quick." Lei Xingfeng ran forward, and AI Yao followed closely behind. This path was quite long, but as the distance shortened, Lei Xingfeng soon saw the blue light flourishing. The two rushed out of the narrow passage and entered a crystal world. It was just a place of about 100 square meters. It was filled with blue crystals that were as thick as a thigh and a few meters long. The small ones were as thick as an arm and were a foot long. They were all piled up together and grew like a crystal tree. AI Yao said, "Crystal room." He then added, "This is a small crystal room. A large crystal room is at least 1,000 square meters. Ha! I've finally seen a crystal room." Lei Xingfeng went forward and broke a crystal. He said, "This is an energy crystal?" AI Yao said, "Not only energy crystals but also phase. The crystal room will definitely produce phase. It's just a matter of how many there are. Maybe one fei, maybe two, but not more than three." Lei Xingfeng said, "If one fei comes out, it's mine. If there are two, it's still mine. If there are three, maybe I can give you one." AI Yao was instantly stunned. He remembered his agreement with Lei Xingfeng and was caught unprepared. Actually, even if there were three, if he took one, he still had to compensate Lei Xingfeng because he could only get 20%. Lei Xingfeng also wanted phase. Even if he had enough phase to use, there was still a group of people at home who lacked phase. AI Yao said, "If there are feis, I don't want anything else. I just want one fei." He decisively gave up other rights. Lei Xingfeng said, "That's fine." AI Yao howled in his heart. "These are all treasure-grade energy crystals. What loss?" Lei Xingfeng happily started to collect the blue crystals. AI Yao looked on anxiously. AI Yao kept his promise and didn't move. He only hoped that a fei would come out. This was what he wanted the most after entering Sky Paradise. If he succeeded, there would be hope for him to advance to a 7-ring true body. Most feis were sealed in various crystals. Only a very small number of feis that had intelligence would think of ways to come out. Therefore, the fei would definitely be inside the blue crystals. When Lei Xingfeng collected them, he was very careful. Lei Xingfeng collected them very quickly. This had become a habit. However, although he was collecting them very quickly, he was definitely collecting them methodically. AI Yao's eyelids were twitching as he watched. He felt like a cat was scratching his heart. He was really lacking in energy crystals now, especially treasure-grade energy crystals. However, the agreement restricted AI Yao from moving. He could only watch as Lei Xingfeng collected them. This feeling was simply unbearable. Lei Xingfeng would occasionally look back at AI Yao. AI Yao couldn't help but say, "What are you looking at? I won't do anything." Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "Don't worry. If there is a fei, I will give it to you." Finally, after collecting, Lei Xingfeng obtained 2 feis. One of them was weaker and the other was stronger. Lei Xingfeng took them out and said, "Here." AI Yao was pleasantly surprised. "You are giving them to me?" Lei Xingfeng said, "What do you think? Pick one yourself." AI Yao picked up the 2 blue crystals with an awkward expression. He knew that what he said just now was too much. Lei Xingfeng could have given him any one, but he was already generous enough to let him pick one. He hesitated for a moment and still took the stronger one. AI Yao said, "I can use this one directly. I will pick this one." He looked at Lei Xingfeng with a little apprehension. Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't look at me. Since I am letting you pick, the choice is yours, not mine. You can take whichever one you choose. I have no objections." AI Yao was relieved and kept the fei. The ground was clean, unlike before when it was full of crystals. If it was like that, AI Yao would be very uncomfortable. Now he was happy. No matter what, he had completed the mission of entering Paradise Island. The rest was free. With Lei Xingfeng here, he felt that even if there were only 2 portions, it was worth it. Lei Xingfeng looked up and saw spots of light on the cliff. He knew that there was still some value left in this space that was like the bottom of a well. AI Yao said, "Continue moving forward." Lei Xingfeng said, "Wait for me. Take a rest." AI Yao asked curiously, "What are you doing?" Lei Xingfeng said, "There are still some treasures. I want to get them." He then flew up the cliff. AI Yao was shocked and shouted, "Don't go up. It's dangerous." Lei Xingfeng lowered his head and smiled. "Don't worry. I know where the restriction is. I won't touch it." AI Yao then remembered that Lei Xingfeng was a restriction grandmaster. He said, "Don't touch the restriction above. Many people will die." Lei Xingfeng took out a steel pry bar. This was for his main body. It was as thick as a duck egg and was about 1 meter long. If his main body used it, it would probably be smaller than a sewing needle. He came to a place with spots of light and used force to pry open the cliff. He immediately obtained a piece of blue crystal. The quality was actually treasure grade. Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, as expected, as expected." He moved on the cliff and found a spot of light. Lei Xingfeng would dig and then put away the big pieces of crystal. They were all treasure-grade crystals. AI Yao's eyes were red. He said, Me? All right, I will do it too." He then flew up the cliff. Of course, he didn't dare to fly too high. He was digging at the bottom. Xian Feng didn't stop him. He only cared about digging quickly. The first thing he dug was the treasure-grade crystal. Such a treasure-grade crystal. As long as he gathered 5 of them, it would be comparable to a small-scale natural crystal mine. Of course, it was the ordinary natural crystal energy mine. AI Yao dug randomly. However, he couldn't find the right place. Even if he dug randomly, he wouldn't get anything for the time being. Lei Xingfeng's digging speed was very fast. He first dug out the best treasure-grade crystals before digging for the supreme-grade crystals. Suddenly, AI Yao shouted, "Ha! I found one. I dug out a piece." It was a blue crystal as thick as a calf. It was only 2 feet long. It was a supreme-grade crystal. It was considered pretty good. However, compared to Lei Xingfeng's harvest, it was too lacking. The two of them dug back and forth on the cliff. However, the biggest difference between the two of them was that Lei Xingfeng only needed to dig, while AI Yao only needed to dig randomly. Roughly, Lei Xingfeng would dig out 10 to 20 pieces. AI Yao would find 1 piece. He really needed to touch to find it. When Lei Xingfeng was almost done digging and floated down from the cliff, AI Yao had only dug out 20 pieces. Among them, there was a treasure-grade crystal. The other 22 pieces were all supreme-grade crystals. Chapter 925. AI Yao dug out another piece, but there was no more. He had no choice but to land and look at the smiling Lei Xingfeng. He had no choice but to place the crystals that he had dug out on the ground and said, "You get 80%, I get 20%. Take your pick." AI Yao's heart ached, as these crystals were enough for him to battle once. Lei Xingfeng really didn't care about these crystals. With his previous harvest and the crystals that he had harvested from the ground, he didn't care about these 20 energy crystals. He reached out and picked up a supreme-grade crystal and smiled. "All right, this is considered 80%. The rest is yours." AI Yao suddenly smiled. Ever since he had consumed a large amount of energy, his eye sockets had become much smaller. Originally, he wouldn't care about this amount of crystals, but now he was so poor that he was about to cry. Even 20 crystals would be good, not to mention that these were supreme-grade crystals. AI Yao knew that Lei Xingfeng wanted him to take the initiative, so he thanked him softly. He was too embarrassed to say it out loud. His voice rolled in his throat, and Lei Xingfeng didn't hear it all. However, Lei Xingfeng didn't mind. He was extremely satisfied with this harvest. It was even better than the 2 supersized energy crystal mines. What was there to be dissatisfied about? It was especially rare for supreme-grade energy crystals. As for the treasure-grade energy crystals, it was the first time that Lei Xingfeng had obtained so many. If he had obtained one in the past, he would have been overjoyed. There were actually so many here. It was no wonder that he was able to obtain 2 phase. This type of crystal was the easiest to nurture phase. If the range of production of this blue crystal was a little bigger, it might even produce a Fae with spiritual intelligence. That would be a true mystical treasure. However, AI Yao didn't see such a mystical treasure this time. If he did, AI Yao would probably go crazy. This thing was related to his advancement. If Lei Xingfeng wanted it, AI Yao would definitely do everything he could to get it. Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "All right, we could go now. This is a good harvest." Haha, so there is such a harvest on the way up. We didn't lose anything this time. We made a huge profit. Although AI Yao had obtained more than 20 top-grade crystals and even a treasure-grade crystal, he still felt that it was a bit of a loss. However, he felt much better after obtaining a spiritual item. He said, "We've profited. Let's go." The two of them quickly found a narrow passage. This time, it was not a crack but a cave. It curved upwards, and it was still pitch black inside. Lei Xingfeng released a lightning ball to illuminate the path ahead. This way, they could clearly see the path beneath their feet. After walking for a few hours, the two of them appeared on top of a cliff. Lei Xingfeng stood at the entrance of the cave and looked up. Then, he turned around and looked down. It was another canyon. Lei Xingfeng said, "We have to go down from the cliff. I'll go down first. There are no restrictions at the bottom, so it should be the path we need to take." AI Yao said, "Yes. Look at this path. It should be this way. Then we can continue going up." Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "I'll go first." As he spoke, he leaped down from the cliff. When he was about to reach the ground, his rapidly falling body was like a falling leaf that fluttered down. AI Yao followed closely behind Lei Xingfeng and jumped down from the cliff. In a few breaths' time, the two of them stood on the ground. Lei Xingfeng looked back and forth at the two ends of the canyon. This canyon was another huge canyon. In this place, it seemed like huge canyons were normal. There were relatively fewer smaller canyons, and such huge canyons were about 10 kilometers wide. Because the cliff was extremely high, it looked relatively narrow. This huge canyon had countless trees growing, which was very rare. AI Yao suddenly said, "There's water below." Lei Xingfeng listened carefully and vaguely heard the sound of flowing water. He said, "You need water?" AI Yao said, "Yes, there's not much water left. I need to find some more." Lei Xingfeng said, "All right, we will fly close to the ground. The restrictions here will not interfere with our flight. As long as we are not more than 100 meters high, there will be no problem." He looked up and saw many restriction nodes flying about 150 meters in the air. Many of them were probing restriction nodes. As long as they were not more than 150 meters high, they would not touch the restriction nodes. This also meant that the restrictions on the cliff and the entire nameless peak would not react. AI Yao was obviously wary of the restrictions on the cliff. He said, "Are you for real?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I will fly first. You just have to follow. At least in terms of restrictions, I am stronger than you." AI Yao admitted that he was despised by Lei Xingfeng. Perhaps he was much stronger than Lei Xingfeng, but in terms of restrictions, there was almost nothing that could compare. The difference between the two of them was like heaven and earth. Lei Xingfeng quickly flew forward. However, he was only 50 meters above the ground. He maintained his flight on the treetops. One had to know that the speed of flying was not something that could be compared to walking or running. Flying was much faster. The two of them, one in front and one behind, quickly reached the center of the valley. From the sky, they could see a river flowing through the trees. Lei Xingfeng quickly landed on a huge rock by the river. AI Yao followed. He said, "This place is not bad. It is best to rest for a while before continuing upwards." Actually, Lei Xingfeng wanted to return to the Mirror Realm to see if his home was safe. After being out for so long, he had to go back. Even if it was fine, he would feel at ease. Lei Xingfeng said, "Then let's rest for a while. I'm not in a hurry anyway. I can also cultivate. After this period of fighting, I have many ideas. If I cultivate, it will be of great help." AI Yao was confused. What did having ideas have to do with cultivation? However, he did not ask. He said, "All right, let's set up camp by this river." Lei Xingfeng said, "I like to live on a tree. I will find a suitable place." AI Yao said, "Let's set a time. How about 10 days? 10 days later?" Lei Xingfeng said, 10 to 20 days. When the time comes, I will come here to find you. AI Yao agreed and said, okay, I will set up camp by the river. Lei Xingfeng turned and left. He did not want AI Yao to know that he could leave Nameless Peak. AI Yao began to build his simple wooden house. This kind of house was prepared in advance. He just had to take it out and fix it. It was mainly used to shelter from the wind and rain. It was fine as long as there was a clean place to stay. Cultivators did not care too much about it. Lei Xingfeng walked through the forest and quickly left the riverbank. He found a huge tree and flew up. There were quite a few large holes in the tree. He chose one and walked in. Lei Xingfeng set the coordinates in the tree hole and returned to the Mirror Realm. Lei Xingfeng came out of the Mirror Realm's courtyard and went to the wooden shed. Wu Yang, Thunderstorm, and Gao Yi were all there. However, his master Gucci was not there. His little sister Lei Xingyao was also not there. Lei Xingfeng took out a reclining chair and sat down. He then lay down and said, I am so tired. Lei Xingfeng did not need to say anything. Someone went to call Jean Depang to cook for Lei Xingfeng. Xian Feng rarely ate when he was outside, and only when he returned to the mirror world would he remember to eat. To him, eating was no longer a necessity, but a pleasure. Wu Yang smiled. How was it? What did you get this time? Xian Feng laughed. That's a great harvest. Wu Yang said, what did you get? Tell me about it. All right, you didn't put anything into the mirror realm this time. Lei Xingfeng said they were all high-grade materials, and there wasn't a lot of them. There was no need to put them into the mirror realm. Ancestor, I've got something good for you this time. He had gotten so many good things that the higher-ups of the hidden sect were numb to them. Wu Yang did not care. What is it? Let me see. Lei Xingfeng raised his hand and shot a red light at Wu Yang. Wu Yang reached out and grabbed it. It was a red crystal that was 1 foot long. Wu Yang stood up and said in surprise, a spirit item? A fire spirit item? Xian Feng laughed. That's right, I got it from the restriction. My luck wasn't bad. It's a pity that I didn't dare to stay there for long. The restriction there is too perverse. I didn't dare to stay there for long and ran out in a panic. However, I still managed to get a treasure. Wu Yang was grateful. He now knew the secret of the seal. As long as he put this fire spirit item into a seal, he would have the foundation to establish 2 seals. Lei Xingfeng took out a blue crystal and handed it to Thunderstorm. He said, Yi, take this. Thunderstorm had Lei Xingfeng's Lei Yin and a spirit item. However, he would not refuse anything Lei Xingfeng gave him. He smiled and said, what is it? Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, a spirit item that is still growing. You can put into Lei Yin, which you plan to use in the future. It can grow together with Lei Yin. The spirit item produced from the blue crystal was suitable for almost any type of seal. It was a versatile spirit item. This spirit item was the most common in Paradise Sky, and most cultivators were aiming for this spirit item. Gao Yi looked at Lei Xingfeng with eager eyes. Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, Uncle Gao, there is still a chance. We didn't go far this time, but we got so many treasures. If we continue, there should be more. Don't worry, I will try my best to give everyone more things. Gao Yi sighed and nodded. I also need spirit items. Lei Xingfeng said, there will be. Jean Depang came out with a group of people. They were all carrying dishes and placing them on the table. Jean Depang said, the production of the base has already started. All kinds of delicious ingredients have been sent in. The ingredients this time are not bad and are very fresh. Lei Xingfeng took out a lot of supreme-grade blue crystals and said, share some with everyone. This kind of crystal is the best for advancement. Everyone took a few pieces. Wu Yang, Thunderstorm, and Gao Yi got a little more. The higher the cultivation level, the better the effect of this kind of crystal. Wu Yang said, why are you giving me so much? Lei Xingfeng said, a part of it is for Master and Master's wife. Wu Yang agreed and said, yes, I will help you put away. Lei Xingfeng asked again, where did little sister go? Chapter 926. Thunderstorm said, Yao Yao went to a continent for a while and hasn't returned. But I think she went there to cultivate. Don't worry, with the mirror realm, She'll come back if there's any danger. Lei Xingfeng nodded. I see. Well, I haven't seen her in a long time, so I have some materials to give her. Forget it, i.e. you can have them. Give them to her when she comes back. Lei Xingfeng gave Thunderstorm a batch of materials and energy crystals, including the treasure-grade blue crystal. Jean Depang said, "A phone, eat first. We'll talk later. The food won't taste good when it's cold." Lei Xingfeng smiled. Okay. It felt good to have someone care about him. He began to eat. Everyone ate together. Everyone was willing to eat here. Fatty's cooking was the best in the hidden sect. After eating his food, no one was willing to eat anything else. The difference was too big. Filling one's stomach and tasting food were two different concepts. Eating heartily, Xian Feng hadn't eaten like this in a long time, to the point that he felt bloated. Only after serving 3 dishes did it finally end. Each of them hugged their stomachs and laid on the chairs, their faces filled with satisfaction. Lei Xingfeng said, "Fatty, your cooking is getting better and better. I can't help but eat more." Jean Depang smiled. He felt that it was worth it. Someone praising Jean Depang's cooking was better than praising him for his cultivation. He had long since lost interest in cultivation. The only reason he was still cultivating was because he could live longer after advancing to the next level. That way, he could eat more delicious food. This was the main reason why he was still willing to cultivate. Lei Xingfeng asked, "Is there any problem with the base?" Wu Yang said, "There's no problem at the moment. Xi and Jiaoluan and the others are all in the base. They've been a bit busy recently. After they're done, they'll focus on cultivation." Lei Xingfeng asked again, "How's the gathering of materials?" Wu Yang said, "Apart from the high-grade materials and energy you obtained, the others have also discovered and collected a lot of resources that the secret door needs. The hidden sect is doing very well now. The cultivation speed of the low-level disciples is much faster than before." Thunderstorm also said, "Yeah, we used to cultivate too slowly. Now the kids are amazing. Their cultivation speed is incomparably fast. The main thing is that the resources collected by the hidden sect are enough to support the new disciples' cultivation." Gao Yi said, "It's a pity that we still don't have any amazing disciples. It's been so long, and there hasn't been a disciple with good potential like yours." Wu Yang said, "Don't even think about it. If you're lucky, you might be able to meet one. If you don't, it's normal. We're not in a hurry. Every year, there will be a new batch of disciples. After a long time, disciples with good potential will naturally appear." There were already many disciples in the secret sect, but none of them were truly outstanding. However, no one was in a hurry. According to the current development, sooner or later, 1 or 2 true geniuses would appear. Even Lei Xingfeng believed so. Some things had to be accumulated over time. Being anxious was completely useless. This was the situation of the hidden sect. With Lei Xingfeng, it was possible that the hidden sect would gradually grow stronger. Of course, if Lei Xingfeng wasn't there, the hidden sect would eventually grow stronger with the special characteristics of the mirror realm. Wu Yang sighed and said, "We've inexplicably reached this step. The more we go, the better." Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "We're always moving forward. Whether it's us or the hidden sect, as long as we're moving in the right direction, we'll be able to grow stronger." Thunderstorm said, "This time, we're the ones who benefited the most from following a phone to this place. Now that we've truly entered the ranks of high-level cultivators, I thought that I wouldn't be able to do it. I didn't expect that there would still be a chance. Just based on this, our choice was correct. The consequences of making the right choice were right. This was something that everyone agreed on. At the right place, at the right time, and with the right choice, there would be good results. Everyone knew that staying in their hometown was definitely the wrong choice. Staying in outer space wasn't good either. It would be very difficult for them to develop to the peak. Only here was a place where they could develop. Wu Yang said, "Sky Paradise? Must one have 2 true ring bodies to go there?" Xian Feng spoke, "A second true ring body can indeed go, but once you're there, the strength of a second true ring body is too weak. You can lose your life at any time. Even if a practitioner of my level goes, it'll be very dangerous. However, I'm proficient in restrictions, so going there will bring me great benefits. After resting at home for a few days, Exine Feng also took care of some matters and gave away some of the materials he had collected that he didn't need or that Lei Yin didn't even accept. These materials were almost useless to Lei Xingfeng, but to others, they were amazing materials. Lei Xingfeng left these materials to Wu Yang and Gucci for them to distribute to those who needed them. Of course, these materials weren't given for free. They had to be exchanged with lightning-type materials or materials that Lei Xingfeng could use. After all, Lei Xingfeng couldn't collect all the materials he needed by himself. After a few days of busy work, Lei Xingfeng saw that it was about time and returned to Sky Paradise. He came out of the tree hole in the canyon of Nameless Peak. To be able to freely enter and exit Sky Paradise and Nameless Peak, the Mirror Realm's function was very powerful. If Lei Xingfeng's strength was at its peak, even with the Mirror Realm, he wouldn't be able to freely enter and exit such a place. Lei Xingfeng would need to reach a certain level of strength before he could use the Mirror Realm. Quickly returning to the riverbank, Lei Xingfeng found that Moa Yao was cultivating. He was sitting by the riverbank with his seal above his head. Lei Xingfeng saw that Moa Yao was trying to cultivate the seventh seal. If he succeeded, he would have a 7-ring true body. However, Lei Xingfeng only needed to check a little to know that Moa Yao wouldn't succeed. His eyes could see through seals. Moa Yao's seal, and all the changes were a mess in his eyes. The seals of Moa Yao's seal were too messy and huge. Moa Yao didn't have any protection, and he wouldn't place any seals around himself because he didn't know how to do it. He also didn't have any friends to watch over him. In Lei Xingfeng's opinion, this kind of cultivation was courting death. Fortunately, there weren't any animals here, only a few insects and birds. This wasn't dangerous to Moa Yao. This was probably why he could cultivate so boldly. Lei Xingfeng's eyes flashed. This was a good opportunity to peek at other people's seals. Moa Yao was cultivating, so this was a rare learning opportunity. Lei Xingfeng naturally wouldn't let it go. Looking at other people's seals was completely different from looking at one's own seal. Lei Xingfeng was extremely curious. This was also a learning opportunity for him. One had to know that Moa Yao had 6 true ring bodies while he had 4. This meant that his seal was far inferior to Moa Yao's seal. However, Exine Feng noticed a huge problem after seeing through the other party's imprint. The restrictions within Moya's imprint could be said to be a mess. According to Exine Feng's words, this was a piece of wilderness. All of the restrictions were free to grow without any interference from humans. However, Lei Xingfeng's own seal was completely different. In his Lei Yin seal, all the seals were useful and arranged neatly. There was a real difference between the two. What surprised Lei Xingfeng the most was that Moa Yao's seal was filled with seal communities. Almost all the corners were filled, and new seals were still being formed. The original seal communities started to crazily suppress the new seal communities, forming an intense competition. Some of the seal communities weren't of much help to Moa Yao's combat strength, but they could occupy a lot of resources and suppress the formation of new seals. This kind of internal friction made Lei Xingfeng's eyelids twitch. All of this required a huge amount of materials and energy. Under the control of the seal owner, it was possible to defeat these useless seals. The price was too high. Lei Xingfeng thought about his Lei Yin. There were many empty spaces in his Lei Yin. Some useless seals were erased by Lei Xingfeng as soon as they appeared, not giving them a chance to grow. This could save a huge amount of materials and energy. Looking at the overgrown seal communities, Lei Xingfeng was extremely shocked. Moa Yao's seal really grew in the wild. There was no planning or guidance. Once it reached a certain level, it would be very difficult to progress. For example, a 7 true ring body needed 7 seals. These seals needed enough space to form seal communities. If there wasn't even space for new seal communities, how could one combine seals? This was Moa Yao's bottleneck. It was very difficult for him to step into the 6th ring. In Lei Xingfeng's eyes, at least half of the seal communities in Moa Yao's seal were useless and needed to be erased. Leaving half of the seal communities was enough. By relying on these seal communities, not only would his strength not decrease, but it would also increase. If he could erase those useless seal communities, it wouldn't be difficult for Moa Yao to advance. But now there was almost no hope. What a pity. Lei Xingfeng sighed in his heart. From seeing the seal communities and analyzing the pros and cons of the seal, he understood a lot of things. This was very beneficial for his advancement. In Lei Xingfeng's eyes, Moa Yao had wasted a lot of materials and energy. At least a third of it was pure waste. Suddenly, Moa Yao retracted his seal. He looked up and saw Lei Xingfeng. He was shocked and said, "When did you come back?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Not long ago. I saw that you were cultivating, so I waited here and protected you." Moa Yao nodded. Companions protecting was a rule that everyone understood. Since he was here, he had to protect the person cultivating. Lei Xingfeng said, "How's your cultivation?" He deliberately asked this. He wanted to know how Moa Yao felt, or Moa Yao's cultivation trick. Chapter 9:27. AI Yao didn't mind and replied, "It wasn't very smooth. You have to know that after cultivating to the 6th ring, true emperor, progress is very difficult. It requires a lot of materials and energy, as well as good spirit items. AI, the cultivation time this time was too short. I just cultivated a little and didn't expect to have such great progress." Xian Feng spoke. "Do you know what happened to your imprint and imprint?" AI Yao said, "I know, I can feel it. The higher the level, the clearer the feeling." Lei Xingfeng said, "There are a lot of useless restrictions in your seal." AI Yao was curious. "Useless restrictions? What do you mean?" This simple sentence made Lei Xingfeng understand. They didn't know that the essence of the seal was a group of restrictions. No wonder they couldn't erase the useless restrictions. Lei Xingfeng said vaguely, "Nothing. I just feel that your seal is too full." It was another probing question. AI Yao said, "How can anyone who reaches 6th ring true body not have enough seals? They're all full. My cultivation is to expand the capacity of my seal. When I combine it with the next seal, this problem will be solved, so don't worry." Xian Feng felt disdain in his heart. He had relied on his intuition to cultivate to the 6th ring. There was no justice in this world. This was true luck. But he knew that AI Yao had almost exhausted his potential. Unless he had some heaven-defying treasure that could expand his seal to a certain extent, he might be able to improve again. Right now, it was almost impossible for AI Yao to improve. Even if AI Yao managed to advance, he would barely be able to do so. Perhaps 7 true ring bodies would be the peak of his cultivation, or even 6 true ring bodies would be his peak. No wonder he came to Sky Paradise to find a chance to advance. It turned out that not all cultivators understood that there were restrictions in the seal, and not all of them understood that many of the restrictions in the seal were actually useless. It turned out that the level of one's own cultivation seal was the true power. After understanding this point, Xian Feng's entire being became spirited. As long as he followed his own cultivation method, Lei Xingfeng felt that he wouldn't have any bottlenecks. As long as he had enough materials and energy, it wouldn't be difficult for him to reach his 8th ring. Furthermore, he was confident that even if he cultivated to the 8th ring, the restrictions in Lei Yin's body would not be full. There would still be some space left. Especially with Lil Kong, Lei Yin's space was many times stronger than other people's seals. This was the source of Lei Xingfeng's confidence. At this point, he understood that if he hadn't been curious and started to learn restrictions and pursued them, even if he had a pair of extraordinary eyes, he wouldn't have been able to do anything about Lei Yin's restrictions. If he didn't know, how could he differentiate between good and bad restrictions? Relying on his pair of special eyes and proficiency in restrictions, Lei Xingfeng's future cultivation path instantly became clear. After figuring this out, he was very happy. Looking at AI Yao, Lei Xingfeng understood that in terms of potential, he was much stronger than AI Yao. AI Yao wasn't dissatisfied. Although he felt that he still needed time, he believed that the 7th ring true body was no longer a dream. He might be able to achieve his goal, especially after obtaining the spiritual item. He was even more confident. However, AI Yao didn't expect that Lei Xingfeng had already seen through his seal and knew that his potential was almost exhausted. Unless he had Lei Xingfeng's ability to erase the useless restrictions, he might have a chance to reach his 8th ring. However, with his current cultivation situation, his chances were very slim. AI Yao smiled and said, "I'm lacking a lot of materials and energy now. I hope that continuing to cultivate will solve my problem. Haha." Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "After you solve it, you can reach your 7th ring, right?" He specially praised AI Yao, and AI Yao's mood instantly soared. AI Yao deliberately said modestly, "It depends on the materials and energy, but I'm confident that I can reach my 7th ring, haha." He couldn't help but laugh. Lei Xingfeng said, "Yes, 7th ring." AI Yao said, "A phone, do you know? What does 7th ring mean here?" 7th ring. Lei Xingfeng said, "What does 7th ring mean?" Actually, he was also curious. AI Yao said, "7th ring means that you've truly reached the peak. If a cultivator can reach 7th ring, they can do whatever they want here." Xi and Feng spoke, "I can do whatever I want with the 7th ring, but there's still the 8th and 9th ring. What are they?" AI Yao said, "First, I'll correct your mistake. There might be some 8th ring, but 9th ring is very difficult to reach. Do you know why?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Why?" AI Yao said, 9th ring is the fusion of all 8 seals. Who can do it? Of course, there are people who can do it, but who can do it now? Fusion of 8 seals? Lei Xingfeng was dumbfounded. He always thought that he needed to prepare the 9th Lei Yin and stack it to become a 9th ring true body, but it wasn't like that. It was the fusion of 8 seals. This was the first time he heard of this concept. Lei Xingfeng said, "Fusion of 8 seals? How do you do it?" AI Yao said, "I do know this." Hee, do you want to know? Lei Xingfeng said, "Yes, tell me." AI Yao said, "I can tell you, but we'll have to recalculate. You take 20, I take 80. Lei Xingfeng said, "You're the one who's second." AI Yao said, "You don't agree? Then I won't tell you." Lei Xingfeng said, "If that's the case, then you can continue to be second. If you don't want to tell me, then forget it." He rejected him directly. AI Yao suddenly realized that his price was too high. It directly blocked the possibility of negotiation. He hurriedly said with a smile, "Then we'll take 70. I'll take 70, you take 30. Lei Xingfeng said, "You can continue to be second." AI Yao was instantly anxious. He said, "This is the secret of the fusion of 8 seals. It's worth it." Lei Xingfeng said, "I believe that you're not the only one who knows about the fusion of 8 seals. Why should I change? I'm not changing. You can continue to be second." AI Yao was about to cry. Why was this person so stubborn? He said, forget it. I'll take 60, you take 40. That should be enough." Lei Xingfeng laughed. "In your dreams, you'll be second." AI Yao didn't know what to do. He said, "You can't not give in at all. The fusion of 8 seals is a secret. Not everyone knows about it. It's worth it." Lei Xingfeng said, "Given a little? All right, 3. AI Yao said, "That's too little. Add a little more." Lei Xingfeng said, "You said it yourself. Add a little more." I added a little more. "It's not 2 anymore, it's 3. Why do you still want to add a little more? Are you addicted? Then you can continue to be second." AI Yao was confused by Lei Xingfeng's 2, 2, 3, 3. After a while, he thought that it would be good if he could get Lei Xingfeng to take a step back and change it to 30%. One had to know that if they entered another layer of seals, there might be more good things. Finally, AI Yao gave in. Actually, if Lei Xingfeng continued to be second, he had to give in too. It was definitely not worth it to compete with Lei Xingfeng now. He said, all right, 30% then." Lei Xingfeng said, "What's with the fusion of 8 seals? Tell me. If I'm not satisfied, you can continue to be second." AI Yao shouted, "Hey, what do you mean?" Lei Xingfeng said, "If you don't say it well, it won't help me. You'll still be second. Don't even think about getting 30%. Of course, you can choose not to say. I'll think of a way to find someone. I'll know eventually. AI Yao said helplessly. You'll be satisfied. I will. Don't look at the extra 10%. In a place like this, 10% was a lot. Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, then tell me. Actually, he could have refused, but he was just curious. Fusion of 8 seals would form the 9th ring, true body. In other words, the final step was to return to 1 seal. This was interesting. It had a hint of returning to one's original state. AI Yao said, fusion of 8 seals means that when you cultivate to the extreme, the 8 seals will naturally fuse together. However, it's rare to reach this step. Anyway, I haven't seen it. Lei Xingfeng said, naturally fused? What's the difference between that and not saying anything? AI Yao said, it's true. There's no secret manual or method to fuse 8 seals. It happens naturally. It's different for everyone. Of course, the prerequisite is that you can reach the 8th ring true body. Lei Xingfeng said, it's still the same as not saying anything. AI Yao said, why not? Why not? I already said it, it's natural fusion. There's no trick. It'll naturally form the 9th ring true body. Xian Feng waved his hands. Old AI, you're going overboard by exchanging 10% of the profits with just this bit of goods. AI Yao panicked and said, was that too much? If you don't know, then you're far from it. Besides, if you can reach the 8th ring true body and still cultivate the 9th seal, then it'll be a big problem. Xian Feng felt that it made sense. If he reached the 8th seal, he would definitely prepare for the 9th seal. That would be a joke. Thinking about it, he spoke, all right, I'll take it that you're right, 30% then. AI Yao smiled and said, that's right. It's definitely worth it. Seeing Lei Xingfeng's glare, AI Yao was a little embarrassed. He knew that he went a little overboard. Of course, he would never admit it verbally. Lei Xingfeng said, you're a senior. How can you bully a junior like this? AI Yao thought to himself, who's bullying who? He said, how are you a junior? You're a master. Lei Xingfeng dug his ears and said, what? AI Yao didn't make a sound. Following Xian Feng made him feel suffocated. Not to mention the distribution of materials and energy. With his strength of a 6th ringed, he had to listen to the commands of a 4th ringed. It was already hard enough. Lei Xingfeng said, all right, let's go. We don't know what we'll encounter. Chapter 928. The two packed up and quickly left the place, flying towards the top of the canyon. Flying close to the treetops, AI Yao asked, are there any treasures here? Or materials? Lei Xingfeng had already observed that there were ordinary materials here, which would not be of much help to him. He said, you ask me, but who should I ask? AI Yao felt like she had been wrong for asking for a point just now. She lowered her voice and said, all right. Let's go ahead and take a look. As she said that, she sped up and flew forward while sticking close to the treetops. The two flew in tandem. As they flew, the canyon gradually became narrower. The narrower here was relative. The originally wide canyon gradually shrunk until it was less than 10 kilometers wide. Then it continued to narrow, and very quickly, it was less than 1,000 meters away. Then he heard the sound of water, and just as he turned around, he saw an 800-meter-long waterfall. Xian Feng counted. There were 5 layers of waterfalls, reaching a height of 5,000 meters. He looked up at the sky above the canyon and saw a rainbow. AI Yao was dumbfounded. She said, there is no way. Should we climb up? Lei Xingfeng said, try climbing. AI Yao was puzzled. What do you mean? No, is it a restriction? In Lei Xingfeng's eyes, there were dense restriction nodes above the waterfall. Climbing up would definitely trigger a restriction, and the restriction here was a standard water-type restriction. Lei Xingfeng did not know much about water-type restrictions, but he knew ice-type restrictions very well. The two actually had many similarities. The two of them had both released their true bodies. Even if Xian Feng was in his true form, the waterfall was still incomparably large. A 5,000-meter-tall waterfall formed a rather steep staircase of waterfalls. Each cascading cascade was a few hundred meters tall. Because he released his true form, the cascading cascade of each cascade felt much better. After taking a few big steps back, Lei Xingfeng looked carefully. Slowly, he started to have a headache. This restriction was really perverse. AI Yao said, "How is it? The restriction here is better than the one before, right?" Lei Xingfeng remained silent as he stared at the screen, searching for any changes. Because he was unfamiliar with water-type restrictions, he had to compare the changes in ice-type restrictions with the changes in ice-type restrictions. Only in this way could he have a better understanding of them, which would take a long time. After looking at it for a moment, Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but smile bitterly. There's still ice element. Like I said, how powerful can a water element restriction be? Without the addition of ice attribute restrictions, it would be difficult to injure anyone. You sure have hidden it well. To think that you even have a bit of spatial restriction in it. AI Yao smiled bitterly. He could only rely on Lei Xingfeng to pass through this restriction. In any case, he couldn't pass by himself. He said, "Is there anyone who is restricted by this restriction?" Lei Xingfeng glanced at it and said, "It would be strange if it didn't." "Oh, it's true. It's an ice restriction spell. This thing is hard to deal with." Ice-type attacks and lightning-type attacks both had the effect of slowing down the opponent. Ice-type attacks were extremely cold, while lightning-type attacks were paralyzing. The two attacks had different methods of attack, but their effects were somewhat similar. The more Lei Xingfeng thought about the combination of ice-type and water-type, the more he felt a headache. AI Yao asked from his side, "How is it? How is it?" Lei Xingfeng sighed and said, "This restriction cluster is powerful." AI Yao didn't understand. How was it powerful? Can you break it? Lei Xingfeng said, "I don't know if I can break it. It's mainly water-type restrictions, but there's also ice-type and space-type restrictions. This kind of mixed restriction is the most troublesome. One restriction is closely linked to another. I don't know what will happen. This is the first time I've seen such a restriction." AI Yao said, "Then what do we do?" Lei Xingfeng said, "What do we do? Salad." AI Yao was stunned. He didn't have the concept of salad. He said, "Salad? What do we do?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't be noisy. Let me see something first." As he said this, he sat down. His huge body sat on the ground, causing the ground to sink. He raised his huge head and looked carefully. After a few hours, Lei Xingfeng released a steel spider puppet. The originally huge steel spider puppet looked only the size of a bowl compared to Lei Xingfeng's real body. Of course, this was the size of Lei Xingfeng's real body. He lightly tapped on the steel spider puppet. The steel spider puppet climbed up and instantly climbed into the restriction. It climbed up the waterfall. Instantly, the white foam of the waterfall increased and quickly formed a fog that covered the entire area. AI Yao said, "What's going on? I can't see anything." However, Lei Xingfeng could see very clearly. When the steel spider puppet entered the restriction, it lost its direction and crawled randomly. After a few hundred meters, an extremely cold current froze the steel spider puppet. Under the impact of the current, it was quickly shattered and disappeared. As the steel spider puppet was shattered, the fog also dissipated. The waterfall continued to roar. Lei Xingfeng used this opportunity to finally see some changes in the restriction. He then lowered his head and deduced in his mind. He deduced the changes in the restriction and the possible killing moves. All kinds of changes were churning in Lei Xingfeng's mind, tormenting him to the point of wanting to die. This level of restriction really gave Lei Xingfeng a headache. However, he didn't know that as he deduced, some restrictions in Lei Yin's mind were also rapidly growing. Soon, Lei Xingfeng discovered the changes in Lei Yin. He couldn't help but be pleasantly surprised. Analyzing such an extremely complex restriction could help his Lei Yin grow. Immediately, Lei Xingfeng felt much better. He began to clear his mind and carefully analyze the changes. He slowly deduced as he searched for the location of the restriction's core. Like this, he calmed down and was no longer agitated. Mo Yao also reacted. He didn't dare to continue harassing Lei Xingfeng. In his boredom, he could only walk to the side and sit down. Lei Xingfeng stared at the restriction while Moa Yao stared at Lei Xingfeng. This time they sat for a long time. After sitting for 3 days, Moa Yao was about to go crazy. This fellow constantly walked around in circles and constantly muttered, "It's over. This brat is stunned. It's been so long, and he hasn't moved at all. I find it strange. What's so good about this thing?" On the first and second day, Moa Yao was able to keep his cool. However, on the third day, this fellow was constantly nagging. Seeing Lei Xingfeng's steady appearance, Moa Yao was infuriated. This was too torturous. Moa Yao wanted to ask several times, but when he saw Lei Xingfeng's focused appearance, he knew that if he disturbed him, this fellow would definitely explode. With great difficulty, Moa Yao finally saw Lei Xingfeng's head move. In the end, he discovered that this fellow was still observing. He didn't understand. After such a long time, he should have seen everything clearly. He didn't understand. In fact, Lei Xingfeng wasn't looking at anything. He was only deducing the changes in the restriction in his mind. The reason why it took so long was because the restriction in Lei Yin's body was also changing. Every time he understood a restriction change, Lei Yin's restriction would have a similar effect. This allowed Lei Xingfeng to verify it. He was comparing back and forth like this. Time quietly passed. Finally, Lei Xingfeng stood up. Moa Yao's eyes were almost brimming with tears. He never knew that waiting for someone would be so irritating. He came to Lei Xingfeng's side and said, "How is it?" Lei Xingfeng glanced at him and said, "You keep clattering beside me. It's very annoying. Can you be quieter? If you were quieter, I would have stood up long ago." "All right, we can enter the array," Moa Yao said. "We can enter the array? Do you understand this grand restriction array? Can you break it?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Once you enter this array, you will find it very fun. Hee hee, but our first step is to break the restriction hub. We will just have to face the rest head on." Moa Yao said, "All right, I will listen to you." At this time, Moa Yao was already very fluent. He didn't need to think at all. He felt that it was a logical thing to do. Lei Xingfeng said, "You will take the lead. However, I will give you a lead. Then, under my guidance, you will follow my instructions." As he spoke, he took out a steel rod and pointed it at Moa Yao. He said, "Grab one end and let's go." Moa Yao grabbed one end of the steel rod and said, "All right, I will take the lead." Moa Yao knew that in terms of strength, it was better for him to take the lead. After all, he was stronger than Lei Xingfeng. Moreover, with Lei Xingfeng's guidance, at least he wouldn't run around and trigger unnecessary restrictions. However, Moa Yao quickly reacted and said, "A phone. We are climbing a waterfall. How can we climb with a steel rod in one hand?" Lei Xingfeng said, "You think we're climbing a waterfall?" Moa Yao said, "This isn't it climbing a waterfall." Lei Xingfeng said, "Walk to the bottom of the waterfall first. You will know immediately." As expected, Moa Yao walked to the bottom of the waterfall. Immediately, his huge body triggered the restrictions. In an instant, the two of them were standing in a body of water. This water was just above the knees of the real body. The current was turbulent, but the real body's huge weight could completely suppress it. Moa Yao was dumbfounded. He said, This, where's the waterfall? Why is the waterfall gone?" Lei Xingfeng said with a smile, "This is the effect of the spatial restrictions." Moa Yao said, "But I can't imagine that I am on top of a waterfall." As he spoke, he stomped his foot. However, because his knee was in the water, this stomp didn't cause any tremors. It only caused a few whirlpools to dissipate his strength. Lei Xingfeng said, "Let's go." He stood behind and tapped the steel rod in his hand. Because the other end was in Moa Yao's hand, his order was transmitted clearly. Moa Yao knew which direction Lei Xingfeng wanted to go based on the power of the steel rod. He immediately stepped forward. At this moment, the heavy rain poured down. Instantly, the surroundings became a blur. The current was even more turbulent. If it wasn't for his huge, true body, his main body wouldn't be able to stand here. Because they were going against the current, AI Yao's movements were a bit strenuous, causing Xian Feng, who was following her, to be shocked. This was a sixth ring true body. The strength of this current was simply terrifying. Chapter 929. They were surrounded by water, and they couldn't see the end of it. They couldn't see anything else either. Other than water, there was still water. The rain was like water falling from the sky. Fortunately, they were both in their true forms, so the raindrops couldn't hurt them. With Lei Xingfeng's knowledge, he knew that if a Dao Monarch-level cultivator came in, the rain could almost break through the defense. This restriction was so perverse. However, Lei Xingfeng had 4 true ring bodies now. This bit of rain couldn't make him use up much energy. Lei Xingfeng said, "Take 7 steps to the left. Take a normal stride. Don't take big steps." AI Yao took 7 steps, and Lei Xingfeng continued, "Take 8 steps forward." Yes, that's the right stride. Lei Xingfeng could see through restrictions, so he knew where to find the restriction core. This restriction core was used to break the illusion formation. At this time, the illusion formation hadn't shown its use yet. Once a battle broke out, the illusion formation would be very useful. Right now, only the spatial restriction and the water restriction were effective. The true attack had yet to arrive. The deeper he went, the more terrifying the attack would be. Before that, he had to eliminate a hidden danger. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to let go of the Magi. Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay, continue to take 3 steps to the left. Slow down, slow down." Yes, that's it. AI Yao carefully listened to his orders. He knew that he had to be more obedient in a restriction, especially one that could kill an expert of his level. The previous restriction might not have been able to kill him, but without Exine Feng's help, he would definitely be trapped to death, which was why he was becoming more and more fearful of restrictions. Lei Xingfeng felt lucky. The core of the illusion formation was nearby. This meant that when they first entered the formation, the core wouldn't be activated. People who just entered the formation would often overlook this point. Once they missed it, they wouldn't be able to turn back. This was the advantage of being proficient in restrictions. As long as he could find the core of the illusion formation, Lei Xingfeng was confident that he could break it. Once he broke the illusion formation, no matter how strong the restriction was, with AI Yao, who had 6 true ring bodies, he would be able to deal with the attacks coming from below. This was also why Lei Xingfeng was confident that he could pass through this restriction formation. If he went through it alone, even with his spatial ability, it would be very difficult. Especially with this compound-type restriction formation, it would be very difficult for him to pass through without any damage. A gigantic rock suddenly appeared in front of them, and this was with Exine Feng's guidance. They had walked to the correct position. If he took a step off, he wouldn't be able to see the rock. Exine Feng was only a step away, but his steel rod was in AI Yao's hands, so he wouldn't lose it. He asked, "Old AI, what's in front of you?" If Exine Feng didn't look at it with his special eyes, he would also be like AI Yao, only seeing water. AI Yao said, "There's a huge rock in the water." Lei Xingfeng's eyes flashed silver. He said, "Very good. Give it a punch and break it." AI Yao said excitedly, "Just break it?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't talk nonsense, just break it." AI Yao said, "Okay, watch me." Then, AI Yao waved her huge fist and smashed it down. Suddenly, the entire ground trembled, and the water became chaotic. Boom! The entire rock exploded. The power of this punch was absolutely terrifying. It directly destroyed the core of the illusion formation. When the rock exploded, the surrounding scenery shook violently. The fog finally dispersed a little, and the entire water surface was a little fragmented. It looked very strange. AI Yao said, "Is this okay?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Kick again from under the water." AI Yao immediately lifted her leg and kicked. Boom! A stream of water surged up like a fountain. Suddenly, the surrounding scenery changed again. The fog completely dissipated, but the ground didn't stand up and didn't return to the waterfall state. It was still flat ground. However, the thick fog completely dissipated, and many huge rocks appeared. Unless the core of the spatial restriction was broken, the waterfall state wouldn't appear. For the two of them, it was best that they didn't have to climb. Lei Xingfeng stood still and carefully observed the movement of the restriction nodes around them. AI Yao grabbed one end of the steel rod. Lei Xingfeng didn't move, so she couldn't move either. She could only wait and look back at Lei Xingfeng. AI Yao knew that the little guy was looking for the way, so she didn't dare to disturb him. Lei Xingfeng didn't stand for long. After about 5 minutes, he said, "Take 3 steps to the right and then walk forward." The rain was still heavy. It didn't seem like a storm at all. It was like a small knife that hit the water and made swooshing sounds. Lei Xingfeng stretched out his huge palm and looked at the raindrops hitting his palm. "Soon," he said, "it's going to turn. It's going to turn soon. As long as we continue forward, the raindrops will turn into ice. Old AI, let's go first." As AI Yao moved forward, the surroundings became colder. As expected, the raindrops hit the ground with ice, making pattering sounds. Lei Xingfeng said, "Watch your feet." AI Yao realized that the water under her feet started to calm down. It was as though the water had become sticky. Then she heard cracking sounds. The water started to freeze. The speed was extremely fast. Suddenly, the surroundings started to turn white. Cold air also emerged, forming a thin layer of fog. This wasn't fog from an illusion array, but fog from the cold. Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't stop. Keep going." At this time, it was extremely difficult to walk. The water hadn't completely frozen. Only the surface was frozen. When AI Yao walked in front, she relied on her huge true body to forcefully open a path. Lei Xingfeng was more relaxed. As long as he followed behind AI Yao, he didn't have to worry about the water freezing. Lei Xingfeng would occasionally point out the direction to walk. Then, he would constantly observe the restrictions around them. After walking for about 10 minutes, the weather became even colder. Lei Xingfeng said, "9 steps to the right." AI Yao walked 9 steps to the right and immediately saw a rock that protruded about 1 meter out of the water. This rock was lying horizontally in the water. It was about 10 meters long and was lying horizontally on the water. AI Yao asked curiously, "This is also a restriction hub? Do you want me to break it?" Lei Xingfeng said, "No, don't break it. Stand on it. Quickly stand on it." As he spoke, he used the steel rod to push AI Yao up the rock. AI Yao said, "Okay, I got it. Don't push me." He stepped on the rock, and Lei Xingfeng followed. Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay, face me. Back to the water." AI Yao turned around, and Lei Xingfeng said, "Squat down." Lei Xingfeng finished speaking and squatted down. The two squatted down, facing each other. AI Yao asked curiously, "Afon, what are you doing? Why aren't you walking?" Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "This will consume a lot of energy." As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of the wind became completely different. The originally whimpering wind began to become sharp, producing a sharp whistling sound. In an instant, the surrounding water flow completely stopped, and a dazzling white light appeared. Snowflakes formed from palm-sized ice crystals were like spinning multi-edged knives, raining down from the sky. The whole world was white. AI Yao was dumbfounded. He said, "This is the ice restriction?" Lei Xingfeng lowered his head and curled up his body. He said, "This is just the beginning." AI Yao couldn't help but curse. He immediately understood Lei Xingfeng's words. This was just the prelude. The most powerful part was still to come. After about 5 minutes, the palm-sized snowflakes became the size of a wash basin. They were as dense as locusts and made a soul-stirring whistling sound. The scariest thing was that these wash basin-sized snowflakes were actually shooting at the two of them. They rarely fell anywhere else. AI Yao said gloomily, "Why are they only hitting us?" Lei Xingfeng tilted his head slightly and said, "Okay, the ground is solid. Let's go." AI Yao heaved a sigh of relief and said, "I thought we would have to squat here forever. We can finally go. I hope that it won't be too difficult to cross this restriction." Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "Too difficult? Haha, it must be very difficult. However, there's still hope." AI Yao said, "Okay, after this, I hope to be able to collect the materials and energy needed to advance." AI Yao was still in front, while Lei Xingfeng was at the back. As the water surface was completely frozen, they could walk on the ground. The two of them were in their true forms. Their true forms were extremely heavy, so walking on the ice surface was still very comfortable. The wash basin-sized ice wheels became bigger and bigger until they were the size of millstones. AI Yao was crying out in pain. The main reason was that he had used up too much energy to maintain his true form. Xian Feng was at the back, so the attacks he received were much smaller. Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but say, "You don't know how to attack. Are you just letting it hit you?" AI Yao finally reacted. He suddenly realized and said, "Oh, right." In an instant, countless fireballs flew out. At this moment, Xian Feng saw AI Yao's precise control. Each of the ice wheels were hit by a small fireball, and upon being hit by the fireball, they immediately exploded. It was like fireworks. Countless ice wheels were hit by countless fireballs. Instantly, the pressure on the two of them lessened. Lei Xingfeng kept pointing out the direction. AI Yao fought as he walked. The two of them were obviously moving faster than before. After a while, the two of them saw a cliff. AI Yao said, how do we go?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Take a step forward and you'll know." AI Yao said, "One step and we'll fall. It's very deep." Lei Xingfeng looked back and said, "Let's go." AI Yao braced himself and took a step forward. Suddenly, his vision blurred. Lei Xingfeng was almost stuck to him. He heard Lei Xingfeng shout, "Let's go." AI Yao took another step and couldn't help but look back. He saw another cliff behind him, and in front of him was an ice surface. He said in shock, "What is this?" Chapter 9:30. Lei Xingfeng said, "This is the effect of the spatial restriction. If there was an illusion array, even I wouldn't dare to take this step. Don't be in a daze. Let's go." AI Yao continued forward fearfully. He was really a little dizzy. He had never seen such a restriction before. It was extremely mystical. If AI Yao came by himself, he wouldn't dare to take a step towards the cliff no matter what. This way, he wouldn't even be able to pass the first level. If there was an illusion array, he wouldn't even be able to retreat. He would definitely be trapped here. AI Yao was really afraid. Fortunately, he had Lei Xingfeng. He had placed all his hopes on Lei Xingfeng. Whatever Lei Xingfeng said, he would do it. He wouldn't give him any discount. He was honest and didn't dare to have any thoughts of leaving things to chance. After seeing the perverse effects of the restriction, AI Yao's attitude was very proper. The path that Lei Xingfeng chose wouldn't touch the most powerful restriction. As they advanced, the ice will gradually became smaller. It went from the size of a millstone to the size of a wash basin. After a few hundred steps, the wash basin-sized ice wheel gradually became the size of a palm. Such small ice wheels were like ordinary snow to the two of them who had true bodies. AI Yao said, "We finally don't have to make a move on them. Strange, why are they becoming smaller? They should be getting bigger." Lei Xingfeng said, "If you're the one walking, then it is indeed." AI Yao said, "What is it?" Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "It is as you said. They will become bigger. They might even become bigger to an extent that you can't imagine." AI Yao said, "Is it because of the restriction?" Lei Xingfeng said, "This path was carefully chosen by me. Do you think we can just walk around randomly? Only by walking like this can we reduce the power of the restriction." AI Yao smiled bitterly and said, "It is really scary." Lei Xingfeng said, "There is a rocky region in front. Let's go over from there." AI Yao looked for a long time and still couldn't see the rocky region. It wasn't that his eyes weren't good, but he couldn't see through the restriction. According to Lei Xingfeng's guidance, a rocky belt soon appeared. This rock belt was about 200 to 300 meters wide. It extended forward, and one couldn't see the end of it. Wormwood asked, "Are we going up?" Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "All right, go up. You can let go now." AI Yao let go of the steel rod in her hand and said, "I've finally stepped onto solid ground. I've always felt uneasy walking on ice." Lei Xingfeng said, "Now that you're at ease, hee. Soon, there will be something that will make you feel uneasy." AI Yao was puzzled. "What?" Lei Xingfeng pointed at the ice not far away and laughed. "See for yourself." A humanoid figure slowly formed on the ice surface, and countless ice wheels gathered together, giving off cracking sounds. As the ice wheels gathered together, a person gradually appeared. He was 100 meters tall and was about the same size as Moa Yao and Lei Xingfeng's true bodies. Then, another one appeared. Lei Xingfeng said, "Stop looking and run." AI Yao broke into a run. As she ran, she asked, "Why don't we destroy them when they're forming?" Lei Xingfeng ran after her and said, "These are ice element restriction people. It's useless to destroy them." AI Yao said, "Then how do we kill them?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Ignore them. Let's escape to the top of the rock belt first. There are only 2 restriction people. They should be able to deal with them." The 2 ran forward with all their might. The 2 restriction people were still forming, but they were about to succeed. With continuous cracking sounds, 2 restriction people of the same size and made of ice crystals appeared. When they moved a step, they began to chase after Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao. At this time, the small ice wheels had already disappeared. The surrounding cold air was much stronger, forcing the 2 to use their energy to expel the cold. Lei Xingfeng's true body was rolling with electric arcs, while AI Yao's body was covered with a thin layer of flames. There were much fewer restriction nodes on the rock belt, so even if they ran wildly, they wouldn't cause too much of a reaction. Only the 2 ice element restriction people followed closely behind them. After running for about half an hour, AI Yao saw that the rock belt had reached the end. Lei Xingfeng said, "Stop." AI Yao hurriedly retracted her foot that was about to step on the ice. She turned back and said, "What's wrong?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Step back. We have to kill these 2 ice element restriction people on the rock belt. We can't step on the ice now. Otherwise, we'll be in big trouble." AI Yao took a few steps back. She stared at the 2 ice element restriction people running over and said, "Okay, you hold one back. I'll kill the other first." Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay." Then, he quickly ran back. AI Yao also took a few steps back. Soon, the 2 ice element restriction people rushed to the top of the rock belt. Lei Xingfeng held a steel rod in his hand. It was instantly covered with electric arcs. As the electric arcs jumped, the entire steel rod glowed red, and the temperature rose rapidly. The first restriction person quickly approached. Lei Xingfeng fiercely hit the ice element restriction person's chest. In an instant, the steel rod sank into the ice element restriction person's chest. With a loud roar, Lei Xingfeng turned his wrist and immediately restrained the restriction person. Then he pulled out the steel rod and shouted, "This is yours." Then, he had already passed the ice element restriction person and rushed to the ice element restriction person behind him. The restriction person who was stabbed in the chest by Lei Xingfeng's rod quickly closed up after Lei Xingfeng left. There was no damage at all. AI Yao saw this clearly and immediately felt that this thing was not easy to fight. A few huge fireballs smashed into the restriction master's face. As the fireballs exploded, AI Yao rushed in front of the restriction master and punched. According to his plan, even if he couldn't kill the restriction master, he would at least break one of the restriction master's arms. Suddenly, the 2 people's fists collided. With a loud explosion, AI Yao was disappointed to find that the restriction person's strength was super strong. They were actually on par with each other. He knew that he did not go all out, but the restriction person's strength was not bad. AI Yao was very clear that it would be very difficult to kill this restriction person immediately. In the midst of this, he turned back to look at Lei Xingfeng, hoping that he could hold on. AI Yao did not want anything to happen to Lei Xingfeng. Once Lei Xingfeng was finished, he would not be able to live either. In AI Yao's heart, even if he was seriously injured, he had to protect Lei Xingfeng. He was very clear on this point. If Lei Xingfeng was alive, he would be alive. If Lei Xingfeng was finished, he would definitely be finished. If he was finished, Lei Xingfeng might survive. Of course, Lei Xingfeng would be in great danger. This judgment was based on the fact that AI Yao did not know that Lei Xingfeng had the mirror realm. If he knew that Lei Xingfeng had the mirror realm, then he knew that even if he died, Lei Xingfeng would not be in any danger. However, AI Yao didn't have any ideas on how to quickly destroy this ice attribute restriction man. He only fought head-on. What he didn't know was that ice attribute restriction men were compensated by the restrictions, and because of that, Xi and Feng chose to fight on the rock belt. If they fought on ice, it would be even more devastating. Then they would really be unkillable. As AI Yao fought, she pondered about how she could kill this ice element restriction person. Lei Xingfeng rushed towards the second restriction person. That stab just now made him feel a little depressed. He knew that these two restriction people were not easy to fight. The second restriction person clumsily climbed onto the rock belt. When he saw Lei Xingfeng rush over, he also rushed towards Lei Xingfeng. Actually, Xi and Feng didn't have much confidence. This kind of restriction man was at least equivalent to a fifth ring true body. Its weaknesses and strengths were very obvious. He wouldn't be stupid enough to fight against it. There wouldn't be any benefits, and it'd be foolish to do so. Xi and Feng's stick hit his opponent's fist, but this stick didn't hit the tip of his fist. Instead, it went up from the side and pierced into his arm. With a light flick, it was able to deflect 1,000 caddies with 4 tails. In an instant, the fist was deflected. An extremely cold aura brushed past Lei Xingfeng's shoulder. Instantly, Lei Xingfeng felt his true body become a little sluggish. He was secretly on guard. This thing could really numb people. The steel rod was wrapped in large amounts of lightning. In Lei Xingfeng's hands, it was extremely flexible. It hit the opponent's body like raindrops. His head, shoulders, and even his crotch were hit by the steel rod. However, the restriction person did not have the weakness of a normal person. This attack was a waste of effort and did not injure the restriction person. One after another, due to the large amount of lightning on the steel rod, no matter how cold the ice restriction was, it didn't affect Xi and Feng at all. As long as his real body didn't come into contact with the opponent, Xi and Feng's movements wouldn't be a problem and wouldn't be slowed down by the cold. As they fought, Lei Xingfeng suddenly sent out a thunderbolt. It directly hit the ice restriction person's head. In an instant, the ice restriction person's head was burned until it became smaller. Then, Lei Xingfeng's thunderbolts continued to bombard the ice restriction person. It even startled Moya Yao, who was still fighting the restriction person. At this time, the two of them realized the benefits of using elemental attacks. They could really threaten the ice restriction person and cause them great damage. Lei Xingfeng tightly held onto the ice restriction person. At the same time, he continuously attacked with thunderbolts. At the same time, the steel rod in his hand also sent out lightning. At this time, the location of his attacks was concentrated on the ice restriction person's legs. The storm-like attacks were all concentrated on the ice restriction man's thigh. In just a moment, one of the ice restriction man's legs had shrunk by 3 times. It was obvious that one of his legs was thicker and the other was thinner. He was also walking rather clumsily. Lei Xingfeng shouted, "Old Moya, attack its legs. Cripple it." Moya Yao immediately understood. He also focused his attacks on the ice restriction person's legs. They did not let the restriction person regroup or return to the ice surface. The two of them tried their best to maintain the speed of their attacks. At the same time, they tried their best to interfere with the ice restriction person's movements. Chapter 9:31. Xi and Feng sent out lightning attacks while using his steel rod to hit the opponent's thigh that was 3 times thinner. Finally, with the last strike, the ice attribute restriction man's leg broke with a kacha sound. That restriction man knelt down on one knee, his hands supporting himself on the ground. Lei Xingfeng was overjoyed. He raised a huge steel rod and smashed it on the restriction man's neck, hoping to break its neck and make it lose its head. Then, AI Yao also succeeded in breaking one of the ice restriction man's legs. Seeing the ice restriction man kneeling down, AI Yao suddenly laughed. He pounced from behind and grabbed the restriction man's neck. He was better than Lei Xingfeng in this aspect. Lei Xingfeng didn't dare to touch the ice restriction man at all. Huge fists felt like raindrops. Ice particles flew everywhere. AI Yao's fists were burning with flames, causing great damage to the Ice Restriction Man. Lei Xingfeng circled around the Ice Restriction Man and smashed his steel rod crazily. At the same time, he didn't hesitate to use his thunder and lightning. Even if he consumed a lot of energy, he didn't dare to stop. Anyway, he couldn't give the Ice Restriction Man any chance to breathe. This was his only thought. AI Yao's fist finally broke the Ice Restriction Man's head. He pressed down on the Ice Restriction Man's headless body. Before he let go, he heard Lei Xingfeng shout, "Old AI, break its body. This way, it won't lose its vitality." AI Yao's heart tightened. He believed Lei Xingfeng's words and immediately continued to smash. Flames rose and burned the Ice Restriction Man crazily. After a full 5 to 6 minutes, the Ice Restriction Man finally turned into a puddle of water and sprinkled it on the rock belt. Lei Xingfeng was still circling around the Ice Restriction Man. The entire Ice Restriction Man had turned into a pile of ice fragments, but it still didn't turn into water. Lei Xingfeng had no choice but to continue smashing with his steel rod and slashing with his thunder and lightning. Seeing that AI Yao had finished the battle, Lei Xingfeng said, "Come here. Old AI, set fire and burn it." AI Yao rushed over, and a ball of flame fell on the ice pile. Only then did Exan Feng stop, holding the steel rod. He shook his head and laughed bitterly. "This thing is too hard to deal with. If it doesn't melt into water, it'll quickly reform and crawl back up to fight." Lei Xingfeng's fire burned the broken Restriction Man into water. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief and said, "This area is safe now. However, we can't stay here for long. Let's continue." AI said. A phone. They can't be. AI, because they couldn't get any Restriction Man. Because they couldn't get, they can't restriction. It. AI Yao said, "So you want to lure them to the rocky belt to fight?" Lei Xingfeng nodded and said yes. "The reason why we came here is to eliminate the hidden danger of the Ice Restriction Man. If we fight on the ice, it will cause all kinds of reactions. It will be very troublesome, and it will be very difficult to eliminate them. There is still hope on the rocks. Now, it is just as I thought." AI Yao sighed and said, "I've completely given up. With my strength alone, I definitely won't be able to pass through this restriction. No wonder there's a saying among high-level cultivators that going up is courting death. It's really courting death." Lei Xingfeng nodded in agreement and said, "Yes. If you weren't here, I wouldn't dare to go up." Not only did AI Yao feel a chill in her heart, even Exine Feng felt fear in his heart. The restrictions were becoming more and more perverted. The main attacks were also becoming more and more advanced. The battle just now reminded Exine Feng that sometimes, even if one was proficient in restrictions, they still couldn't force their way through. Once they were entangled on the ice, Lei Xingfeng knew that it would be very difficult to deal with the two. There were layers of Restriction Man here. It would be very difficult to break them, especially the Ice Restriction Man. It was extremely difficult to deal with. If it wasn't for this rock belt, he wouldn't have the confidence to get through. This rock belt gave Lei Xingfeng an opportunity. He found a way to get through. The only place where he could deal with the Ice Restriction Man was here. He had already calculated the other places. There was no hope of getting through. Although this path was dangerous, they could avoid being besieged by a large group of restriction people. This was his biggest guarantee to pass through the restriction group. As long as they didn't encounter a large group of restriction people, he believed that with their strength and his familiarity with restriction groups, they could pass through this waterfall restriction group smoothly. The most important thing for this level was to get rid of the two Ice Restriction Man. If they couldn't get rid of them, they couldn't move forward. AI Yao said, "Will there be more Ice Restriction Man in front?" Lei Xingfeng said, "No. As long as we get through one more hurdle, there won't be any Ice Restriction Man. This is the weakest place. As long as we can get through, there won't be any problems." AI Yao said excitedly, "Can we get through?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Are you that unconfident? If we can't get through, why do we come here? Actually, from the looks of this Restriction Man, we can only find this step. In other words, after we pass this restriction, man, we can't continue. AI Yao said, "Why can't we continue?" Lei Xingfeng shook his head and said, "We don't have enough strength. No matter how hard we try, getting through this restriction, man, is the limit. If we continue, we will probably die." Do you think we should continue? AI Yao's confidence was all on Lei Xingfeng. Even he didn't dare to continue. How could he dare to go up? AI Yao said, "All right, how can we continue?" Lei Xingfeng said, "You're fine. I need to reach the 6th ring sage body. You better reach the 7th ring sage body. That way, you can still continue. As for now, if we can get through this restriction, man, we can go back." AI Yao nodded and said, "All right, let's get through this restriction, man, first, and then leave." He was also scared. The restriction man here was definitely stronger than any he had seen before. The two continued forward. This time, it was still AI Yao in front and Lei Xingfeng behind. The two walked very quickly. Under Lei Xingfeng's guidance, they soon saw a cliff. AI Yao was experienced this time. He said, "Continue." Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "Continue." As expected, they flipped again and stepped out. This time, they were on another piece of ice. As the two stepped onto the ice, Lei Xingfeng said, "The restriction man is going to change again. Hurry up and run." The two sprinted forward. There were continuous cracking sounds as the ice melted. Then, fine ice particles fell. The two did not care and sprinted forward. They knew that it was better to run as far as possible before the restriction man exploded. AI Yao's real body was heavy. With each step, the entire ice surface trembled. As they went deeper, every step they took would cause a series of cracking sounds. The further they went, the more frequent the cracking sounds were. Lei Xingfeng said, "The ice surface is going to collapse." Before he finished speaking, AI Yao stepped down. His entire foot sank into the ice. Because he was still running, one of his feet sank and immediately tripped him. It was no different from a tall building collapsing. With a loud explosion, AI Yao fell and immediately smashed a human-shaped hole in the ice surface. Lei Xingfeng was also sprinting and was not far behind AI Yao. He could not stop in time and also stepped into the ice surface. His real body fell down as well. His position was exactly where AI Yao fell. AI Yao used his arms to support his body. Then, Lei Xingfeng's real body fell down. Boom! Lei Xingfeng smashed onto AI Yao's body. AI Yao had just supported half of his real body when he was smashed back into the icy water by Lei Xingfeng. He cried out in pain. The two struggled for a long time before they got up. It had to be known that the real body was most afraid of falling. Once they fell, it was very difficult for them to get up. When they finally got up, the surrounding ice was already very thin. Furthermore, the water under the ice was getting faster and faster. Large amounts of ice started to crack. Fortunately, the two of them were in their real bodies and did not touch a single drop of water. After they stood up, they looked at each other. The two of them could not help but laugh. This fall was very hard. Fortunately, there was no danger around. Otherwise, it would be very uncomfortable. Lei Xingfeng said, "We can't run anymore. Let's keep moving forward. It will be all water soon." AI Yao said, "Actually, I would rather it be ice. Water is too annoying." The two of them did not walk far before they saw a restriction man emerge from the water. AI Yao could not help but complain, "Isn't there no restriction man? Why is there another one?" Lei Xingfeng said, "This is not a real restriction man. This is a water man. Although it is also restricted by restrictions, its strength is relatively weak. If you don't believe me, you could try." AI Yao said, "All right." Lei Xingfeng took a step back. AI Yao rushed forward and soon arrived in front of the waterman. This waterman was made of transparent water. However, there was a large amount of broken ice in the water. AI Yao shouted and punched out. The water person didn't even try to block. The punch pierced into the water person's body. The huge impact caused the water and ice in the water person's body to spray out, creating a huge hole. Withdrawing her fist, AI Yao watched helplessly as the hole that had been opened up was quickly filled with water. Then, it looked completely intact. No matter how he attacked, it was the same. This thing stubbornly existed. AI Yao was dumbfounded. He said, "A phone, how do we fight this?" Lei Xingfeng said with a smile, "There's no need to fight. We don't have to pay attention to it. If we have to walk, we will walk. If we have to stop, we will stop. Just treat it as if it doesn't exist." AI Yao said in surprise, "You can do that? Then what is this thing formed by restrictions for?" Lei Xingfeng said with a smile, "If it is an ice restriction, this thing will be ice, just like what we saw before. But once it is surrounded by water, it will form a water restriction man. Its power will rapidly decrease, and it will no longer be a threat to us. Since it is not a threat, we will just ignore it." AI Yao said, "So that's how it is." The two of them continued forward. Originally, they were walking on ice. Now they were walking on water. Although it was slow, it was very safe. The waterman kept fighting. It attacked and hugged AI Yao. However, the power of water was completely unable to deal with an expert like AI Yao. Therefore, AI Yao simply ignored it. Then, another waterman appeared. Two watermen came forward to entangle the two of them. Chapter 932. Lei Xingfeng charged forward and passed through the water figure. The water figure fell to the ground and appeared again. It continued to chase after Lei Xingfeng and pestered him. Mobi Yao and Lei Xingfeng continued to talk and walk as though the water figure did not exist. However, the water figure still existed. After a while, another water figure appeared. Soon, there were 4 water figures. They were about the same size as Mobi Yao and Lei Xingfeng. The 4 water figures blocked Lei Xingfeng and Mobi Yao. No matter if they attacked or stood in a row to block them, Lei Xingfeng and Mobi Yao did not care. They continued to walk forward. The two of them continued to chat as they walked. Mobi Yao said, "These water figures can't be killed, right?" Lei Xingfeng said, "They can't be killed unless they catch up to us on land. Without water to replenish them, they will become smaller and smaller and eventually disappear. However, they can't be destroyed on the surface of the water." Mobi Yao thought for a while and said, "Is it because there is water below to replenish them?" Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "No matter what, as long as there is water below, they can be replenished at any time. Of course, they won't disappear. That's right, there is still a way to destroy them." Mobi Yao clapped and said, "The restriction hub?" Lei Xingfeng said, "That's right. As long as I destroy the restriction hub, these water figures will have no roots. They will disappear in one strike. However, it will be difficult to find the restriction hub." Hee. Mobi Yao nodded and said, "There is no need. As long as they do not harm us, it doesn't matter." As they spoke, a water figure pounced forward and hugged one of Lei Xingfeng's legs. Lei Xingfeng took a step forward. The water figure's 2 arms were instantly shattered and then regenerated. However, Lei Xingfeng had already walked out. 2 water figures hugged Mobi Yao from both sides. Mobi Yao shook her arms and instantly shattered them. When Mobi Yao walked over, the 2 water figures regenerated in the water. Lei Xingfeng looked at the 4 water figures who were unyielding and trying their best to stop them. He said, "How sad." Wormwood said, "What?" "Oh, about that, there's nothing to be sad about. With such weak strength, it's useless no matter how hard he tries." The 4 water people didn't have any thoughts or intelligence. They were just weapons created by the restriction. However, they persevere in their attacks and desperately try to block. This made Lei Xingfeng feel uncomfortable. The most important thing was that they were all in human form. If they were real people, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't know what to do. Wormwood asked, "How much longer until we can shake them off?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Once we reach the next cliff, they won't be able to follow us." AI Yao said, "How much longer? These things are really annoying." He was clearly a little impatient. Anyone would feel annoyed if they were entangled by 4 humanoid creatures. Even if they didn't have the ability to harm them, they would still feel annoyed if they kept hugging their legs, their bodies, and even their heads. Lei Xingfeng was also very irritated. He said, "Let's charge forward." AI Yao said, "All right, run." The two of them ran forward recklessly. The four water people chased after them desperately. One of them suddenly sank into the water and then stood up not far in front of Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao. Without waiting for the water person to do anything, Lei Xingfeng's huge true body had already crashed into it. With a boom, the water person exploded. AI Yao cheered, "Good." Not far in front of him, another water person stood up. Like Xian Feng, AI Yao also charged forward, causing water to splatter everywhere as the waterman was smashed into pieces. Lei Xingfeng laughed heartily and said, "That's great." The two of them, one in front and one behind, charged forward bravely. The water people kept forming in front of them, and then they were shattered by the two of them. It was a futile attempt to block them. The two of them were running at a relatively fast speed. Even with the obstruction of the water, their speed wasn't bad. The four water people took turns to sink into the water and then appear in front of them before being shattered. In the end, Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao were used to it. Once there was no obstruction, they would feel that it was abnormal. After pulling and pulling, the two of them finally came to the next cliff. Lei Xingfeng took the lead and stepped over. AI Yao followed closely behind. The four water people disappeared in an instant. AI Yao looked at the cliff behind her and said, "How magical." Lei Xingfeng said, "Continue forward." The two of them continued to run in the turbulent water. If they walked slowly, it wouldn't consume much energy. However, if they ran quickly, it would consume a considerable amount of energy. However, at this time, the two of them didn't have any thoughts of saving energy. Leaving this restriction group as soon as possible was the right choice. Soon, the two of them couldn't run anymore. This was because the water started to surge and had reached their waists. The two of them could only move forward slowly. AI Yao was bewildered and said, "Damn it, the water is rising." Lei Xingfeng said, "Yes, looking at the trend, it seems to be rising even higher." As they spoke, the water flooded up to their shoulders. Only their huge heads and half of their shoulders were exposed. Lei Xingfeng said, "Can you swim?" AI Yao said, "What swim?" Lei Xingfeng smiled bitterly and said, "If we are separated by the water, just keep going and don't change direction. If you can find a rocky mountain that protrudes out of the water, just go up and wait for me. Understand?" AI Yao was obviously nervous. She didn't want to be separated from Lei Xingfeng. Once they were separated, who knew what kind of terrifying attacks he would create when he didn't know anything about restrictions? She said, "Where's your steel rod? Drag me away." Without waiting for Lei Xingfeng's reply, a huge wave suddenly surged over. In an instant, the two of them were completely submerged. Lei Xingfeng knew how to swim in his previous life. In this life, he was also good at swimming in his hometown. Therefore, he wasn't afraid of the water. However, AI Yao was miserable. He didn't know how to swim. When the water rushed over, he could only use all his strength to suppress his true body and leave his heavy true body at the bottom of the water. However, the characteristics of his true body made it difficult for the water to sway. This was because his true body was extremely heavy, much heavier than steel. Therefore, AI Yao was able to stabilize himself. However, he didn't dare to float to the surface. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to control himself. On the other hand, Lei Xingfeng floated along with the water. As long as he controlled the restrictions in Leiyin, he could reduce the weight of his body. If his true body was originally heavier than steel, after being converted by the restrictions in Leiyin, his huge body would become a huge piece of wood. In an instant, he rushed to the surface of the water. Lei Xingfeng looked around. After determining the direction, he swam forward. He was like a huge fish that swam nimbly in the water. Suddenly, Lei Xingfeng thought of the waterman. His heart immediately tensed up. Previously, when the water flowed below his knees, the waterman wasn't a threat. However, if it was like the current water, he believed that it would be much more difficult for him to deal with it. As for AI Yao, that would be even more dangerous. The waterman didn't need to attack. He just needed to entangle AI Yao in the water. If he couldn't even see the shape of the waterman in the water, it would be really dangerous. In the water, Lei Xingfeng could still see the restriction nodes. He could also see through the entire restriction. Therefore, he wasn't afraid. As long as he could see through the restriction, he had nothing to fear. AI Yao didn't dare to move until the water completely submerged him. When he raised his head, he saw whirlpools in the turbid water. At the bottom, he couldn't even see his own feet. Relying on his memory and Lei Xingfeng's words, he was barely able to determine the direction to move forward. He carefully slid one step, then another. He used an extremely slow speed to move forward. Fortunately, he didn't use his true body and didn't need to breathe. The water wouldn't suffocate him to death. Other than being afraid of the attacks from the restrictions, the water didn't pose much of a threat to him. Lei Xingfeng quickly went against the flow. He now understood that as long as he expended enough energy, he could move as fast as he wanted. His two arms danced like wind and fire wheels. Every time he struck the water, there would be a heaven-shaking explosion. His two arms took turns, and the rumbling sounds echoed. Like an arrow leaving the bow, Lei Xingfeng's huge true body flew at high speed on the water surface. His two thick legs also struck the water surface, leaving behind a trail of white foam. This was even faster than running. However, the energy consumption was several times higher. However, Lei Xingfeng didn't care. He might lack other things, but he had the most energy. This was also related to the importance of collecting energy. He didn't need other things, but energy was the resource he plundered the most. He knew the importance of energy. Therefore, at any time, Lei Xingfeng carried enough energy. If Lei Yin and the energy in his hidden Luan space ran out, he could still transfer energy from the mirror world. This was also one of his trump cards. To Lei Xingfeng, the more energy he stored, the safer he would be. At this time, no matter how much energy he used, it was still not enough compared to a battle. Lei Xingfeng drove Lei Yin and his true body's two arms and legs, quickly swimming in the water. However, Moby Demon was slower. He stopped with every step and stopped with every step. He slowly moved forward, and even he didn't know how long he would have to walk. As long as he continued to walk, this was Moby Demon's only thought. No matter how slow he was, as long as he moved, he would reach his destination. This was something Moby Demon firmly believed. Therefore, he moved step by step. Fortunately, his true body was big enough. With every step, he would move more than 10 meters. Thus, his speed wasn't unbearably slow. Lei Xingfeng was like a fish and also like a big boat. One must know that his true body was more than 100 meters long. It was very frightening in the water. After swimming for about 10 minutes, Lei Xingfeng saw a black rock in the distance. He immediately swam over. Soon, he reached the rock. Lei Xingfeng reached out and grabbed the rock. He suddenly straightened his body and climbed up. This rock was relatively big, with a radius of 100 meters. Lei Xingfeng sat down. He had to wait for Moby Demon to arrive. If they were separated for too long, they would really be separated. If they lost contact in the seal, it would be extremely difficult to find them. After waiting for a while, the surroundings were still raging. Lei Xingfeng thought for a moment and immersed his consciousness into Lei Yin. After this period of time, Lei Yin had produced many seal clusters. He had to identify them and then remove the useless ones and keep the useful ones. Chapter 9:33. Lei Xingfeng didn't stop working. Because the restrictions in Lei Yin were constantly growing, new restrictions would appear at any time. This required Lei Xingfeng's constant attention. Once the restrictions grew, it would be very difficult to get rid of the useless restrictions. In particular, the useless restrictions would consume a large amount of materials and energy to grow. This was something Lei Xingfeng absolutely couldn't tolerate. The more he fought, the more intense the activity, and the more restrictions he thought about, the greater the changes in Lei Yin. This was what Lei Xingfeng had experienced over the years. Moreover, he found that when he observed high-level restrictions and complex restrictions, his Lei Yin would also change. There would even be similar restrictions that would appear. After a round of inspection, he found many useless restrictions. However, some useless restrictions would appear every time. They were like weeds, constantly growing. Erasing restrictions one by one was a very easy task for Lei Xingfeng. He was very familiar with this process. Of course, if a restriction grew, it would be very difficult to erase it because it would involve other restrictions. After erasing a lot of useless restrictions, Lei Xingfeng would look at the water from time to time. Of course, there was still no change. The entire restriction formation seemed to have slowed down. Lei Xingfeng carefully erased the useless restrictions and then drove Lei Yin to make the restrictions grow rapidly. During this time, he would consume a lot of materials and energy. Of course, this was also a kind of cultivation. Once he started cultivating, time wasn't important. This way, he would be able to calm down. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng began cultivating in the restriction formation. Ever since he advanced to the fourth true ring body, the restrictions in Lei Yin had increased on a large scale. The four seals also gradually became closer and connected with each other. The restrictions intertwined and formed new restrictions. All of this caused Lei Xingfeng's strength to increase greatly. After cultivating for a full 5 days, Lei Xingfeng finally saw a huge head emerge from the water. He couldn't help but shake his head. When AI Yao saw his head emerge from the water, he saw Lei Xingfeng's mountain-like true body. He couldn't help but grin. He didn't go wrong. He didn't go astray. Even if these 5 days were very difficult, AI Yao felt that it was worth it. This meant that he could continue to follow Lei Xingfeng. Otherwise, he would have to rely on his own strength to break out of this restriction formation. However, AI Yao understood that it would be extremely difficult for her to walk out of this formation with her own strength. Therefore, when he found Lei Xingfeng, he couldn't help but smile. He put down all his worries. He didn't know when it started. AI Yao didn't know that he, a sixth true ring body expert, was actually so reliant on this little guy. He slowly climbed up the rock and sat down. AI Yao said, "I'm really exhausted." Lei Xingfeng said, "I'll wait for 3 more days. If you don't come, I'll leave." AI Yao broke out in cold sweat. He said, "Do you have to be like this?" Lei Xingfeng said, "This isn't my decision. It's the restriction formation's decision. In 5 days, the restriction formation will erupt. I only gave myself 2 days to escape. If you don't come, I can't do anything." AI Yao said in fright, "Restriction eruption?" Lei Xingfeng said, "To be precise, it's an ice restriction eruption with a little water restriction. At that time, if you don't escape from this range, it will be very difficult to endure." AI Yao said, "Fortunately, I didn't dare to stop. I've been walking underwater. It's scary." Lei Xingfeng said, "Fortunately, the water people didn't appear. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to reach in 5 days." AI Yao said, "Water people? Wow, that's right. If a few water people appeared here, underwater, they wouldn't even attack. If I got lost, I'd be done for." Lei Xingfeng said, "Rest for a while. We have to leave quickly." AI Yao said, "Lend me some energy. I'll return it to you later." He couldn't hold on anymore. He had used up too much energy and hadn't collected any new energy. He had no choice but to ask Lei Xingfeng for help. Lei Xingfeng thought for a while and nodded in agreement. He gave AI Yao a batch of energy crystals. Lei Xingfeng knew that they had to be united here. If the two couldn't cooperate well, it would be difficult to continue. After giving AI Yao a batch of energy crystals, AI Yao's courage increased. He said, "This way, I'll have the power to fight." Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't tell me you've used up the basic energy protection." AI Yao smiled bitterly and said, "Although I haven't used it all, I don't have much left. So, don't worry. I'll return it to you." Lei Xingfeng nodded. He had enough energy crystals anyway. Even if he gave some to AI Yao, it wouldn't be a problem. With the replenishment of the energy crystals, AI Yao finally felt alive again. Originally, he had almost lost his confidence, and the energy in his hands was not enough. AI Yao hurriedly replenished the energy crystals and said, "All right, there's no need to rest. Let's leave this place. I don't want to face the seal explosion." The sooner we leave, the better. Lei Xingfeng stood up and said, Yes, I don't want to face it either. After the explosion, I don't know what kind of danger I'll face. It's better to leave as soon as possible. AI Yao stood up and looked at the water beside the rock. He suddenly hesitated and said, But what do we do with the water? The water was a few hundred meters deep. AI Yao was like a weight. He couldn't float at all. He wouldn't be like Lei Xingfeng. He wouldn't use the seal and Lei Yin to reduce the weight of his true body. Lei Xingfeng asked, Do you have a chain? AI Yao said, I have this. Let me find it. He quickly found a huge steel chain in his hidden Luan space. Lei Xingfeng said curiously, You really have it? The chain was quite long. It was as thick as a water bucket. It was definitely enough for Lei Xingfeng. Lei Xingfeng put the chain on AI Yao and said, Don't worry about anything. Let me drag you. AI Yao looked at the chain awkwardly. However, he couldn't move quickly. He could only give in and said, All right, you carry me. He used the chain to tie himself. The two of them walked into the water. This time, when Exine Feng swam in the water, he felt as if he was tied to a lump of iron. His entire body was about to be dragged into the water. He could only increase his swimming speed, allowing himself and Ma Yin to be dragged up. In an instant, his energy consumption increased greatly. However, once his speed increased, he wouldn't sink into the water anymore. Dragging AI Yao, Lei Xingfeng's speed was extremely fast. He relied on large amounts of energy to maintain his speed. After a day and a half, Lei Xingfeng finally reached his destination. Other than water, there weren't any other attacks. Soon, they entered a shallow water area. Lei Xingfeng climbed up and dragged AI Yao out of the water with the chain. AI Yao's huge body hit the bottom of the water and gradually floated up. Lei Xingfeng said, Don't lie down. Climb up. It's already shallow water. Lei Xingfeng let go of the chain and complained, You are simply a metal lump. AI Yao chuckled. He also knew that he was terrible in this aspect. He said, Where are we? Lei Xingfeng said, Do you still remember that waterfall? We should be in the central zone. AI Yao said, We are just in the central zone. I feel that we are very, very far away. I thought we were about to leave. Lei Xingfeng said, If the illusion array was still here, you wouldn't have the concept of time and distance. This speed is already very fast. AI Yao said, We are about to reach the cliff, right? He now knew that reaching the cliff was equivalent to entering another layer of restriction. Lei Xingfeng looked back and said, We escaped quickly. If we continue to stay here, it would cause the restriction to explode. AI Yao said, Interesting. If the restriction explodes, no matter how powerful it is, it will be useless if we leave. I don't understand why the restriction was designed this way. Lei Xingfeng said, That's because the illusion array was broken. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to escape so quickly. There are too many disturbances. If the illusion array was still here, even if Lei Xingfeng's speed was fast, he would still be a burden. Even if he could see through the restriction, he would still be slowed down. This was also the reason why he wanted to break the illusion array in the first place. After walking for a short distance, AI Yao saw the cliff. He smiled and said, We are finally here. As he said that, he took a step forward and directly crossed the cliff. Lei Xingfeng followed and said, There is no water here. No, there is very little water. There was only about a foot of water on the ground. It had no effect on the two of them. The ground was made of solid rock. AI Yao said, Should we run? Lei Xingfeng said, No rush. Let me take a look first. AI Yao said, All right, I will stand guard at the side. Lei Xingfeng's eyes flickered with silver light. After a while, he said, This time, we will probably have to fight. AI Yao said, Is it a restriction person? Lei Xingfeng said, I can't say. It doesn't seem like a restriction person. What a strange feeling. Forget it. I can't be bothered to speculate. The real thing is to cross it as soon as possible. If he wanted to deduce it, he would need to spend at least half a day. Lei Xingfeng didn't want to waste time either. This kind of large array had a special characteristic. The longer it took, the stronger the restriction would be. At the beginning, it would only take a little time and effort to cross it. Once it took too long, they might have to risk their lives to cross it. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng didn't want to waste time. Relying on his proficiency in restrictions and his careful observation before entering the array, he had a certain idea. The two of them looked at each other. Lei Xingfeng broke into a run, and AI Yao immediately followed. The two's rumbling footsteps immediately resounded through the ground. This piece of land was different from the previous ones. There was no storm here. There was only a thin layer of water on the ground. There wasn't any rapid flow of water either. However, Lei Xingfeng understood that the danger here was much greater than the previous ones. They had to cross it as soon as possible. The two of them ran as fast as they could. Due to the weight of the true body, AI Yao's speed was obviously slower than Lei Xingfeng's. Originally, Lei Xingfeng might not be able to outrun AI Yao. However, after comprehending the method to reduce the weight of the true body in the water, his speed immediately increased. As Lei Xingfeng exerted his strength, AI Yao gradually fell behind. AI Yao couldn't help but shout, "Wait for me! You are too fast." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.